A bitter wind swept in from the north, carrying the memory of endless nights and pale skies that bled with dancing auroras. Though the long night had ended, its bite lingered in the hearts of every living soul in Westeros. In the war-torn landscapes, ravaged by whites and white walkers, there were fewer sturdy walls left to shelter behind, fewer swords left gleaming in human hands. The cost of victory had been monumental. Thousands had fallen, lords, knights, peasants, everyone in between. Fields once golden with barley and wheat lay scorched or frozen, entire holds vacant, left to quiet ruin. Survivors returned to discover shattered homes, battered castles, and roads choked with debris. A hush descended upon the Seven Kingdoms, as though Westeros stood on the precipice of something unknown. Yet, amid the rubble, hope found a way to coil itself around battered hearts. Dawn had broken over the armies of the living when the Night King fell, and with him, the dread creatures he commanded. Humans, for the most part, believed this victory would usher in a new era, a time of rebuilding and forging alliances among the fractured families. But victory sometimes blinds. The forces that moved in the deep forests and the shadowed hollows of Westeros did not vanish merely because one threat had been quelled. Other powers stirred, older than men, older than the kingdoms they had fashioned. The children of the forest, so often spoken of as myth or memory, began to return to the land in greater numbers than any living person had witnessed in an age. Those rare few who truly knew their nature called them the Nameless. Some remembered old stories of their gentleness, their gift with magic, and their cunning. Others recalled only war and vengeance, the ancient tales of the first men and the violent conflict that had once changed the face of the continent. In the north, beyond the charred remains of Winterfell's outer walls, wisps of dust danced across a courtyard pitted by the footprints of armies. Winterfell had been retaken at great cost, and its people wore their sorrow heavily. They worked day and night to repair collapsed towers, refortify the gate, and bury their loved ones who had perished in defense of the living. Bodies wrapped in linen were lowered into freshly dug graves, and the mourning songs that rose into the crisp air were a constant, somber refrain. The haunting memory of the whites climbing the walls echoed in the minds of the survivors. But the living had prevailed. Now, in the aftermath, the once bustling great hall was half empty. Gone were many of the banner men who had called Winterfell home. But something else had come in place of those lost. In the snowbound woods that ringed the holdfast, watchers on the rebuilt ramparts occasionally spotted slender shapes flitting between the trees. The watchers' hearts pounded at the sight, for they had learned to be wary of anything strange in the darkness. Rumors spread. The children of the forest had returned, as they had done once before, in the catacombs beneath the weirwood trees. Some of the watchers swore they glimpsed large, glimmering eyes and skin the color of bark, but these visions were fleeting. Quiet dread settled over those who spotted such shapes, for they could not be certain whether these watchers in the woods brought menace or some form of protection. Inside Winterfell's solar, Lady Arya Stark, named for her famous ancestor, though she was of a younger generation that had grown up under constant threat, studied old scrolls by the light of a single candle. She had inherited her mother's keen eyes and her father's steadfastness, making her a calm presence in a world of chaos. Now that the war against the dead was done, she felt a sense of hollowness in this respite. She trained her entire life for a war that had now ended. She possessed a mind for strategy, a sharpness inherited from generations of Starks, and a heart that still harbored ghosts of loved ones lost. Outside her window, the weirwood tree in the Godswood seemed to whisper in the wind, its white branches trembling. She could almost hear voices in that wind, like the soft echoes of secrets no human was ever meant to know. A rap on the door broke her concentration, causing her to glance up from a map she was studying. "Enter," she called. Elia Mormont, whose house had once been nearly decimated, stepped in. She was pale, with eyes ringed by shadows, but that didn't diminish the steel in her gaze. She inclined her head respectfully. "We had watchers on the walls last night, my lady," she said. "They spotted more shapes in the trees." Arya closed her scroll and rubbed her temples. They'd been discussing these sightings for weeks. Part of her, The pragmatic side wanted to send out scouting parties to track the movements of these beings, these rumored children. But another part, the part that had grown up hearing old Nan's tales, told her that these watchers might not be so easily followed. Were they men or beasts? She asked quietly. No one knows, said Elia. But the watchers swear they saw faint glimmers, like eyes reflecting torchlight. They were small, or perhaps hunched low. If it weren't for footprints left in the fresh snow, we'd think them a trick of the moon. Arya sighed. I see. She turned back to the flickering candle on her desk. Double the watch, especially at the postern gate. If these shapes are indeed the children, we need to make sure they don't intrude unaware. But if they come seeking parley, we cannot show hostility. Now. Elia nodded but hesitated before leaving. There's talk among the small folk that the old powers are awakening, my lady. They say the wind is different, that the ravens caw more ominously. Many are afraid. Fear is natural, Arya replied, her voice steady. We lived a nightmare. We came out alive. Now we must be on guard not to invite another. Let them talk, but let them also remember that winter always passes. We will endure. When Elia departed, Arya pored over the map once more. It detailed the northern expanse, from Winterfell to the Wall. She had scribbled notes about the free folk who had settled in the Gift, about pockets of undead they'd had to burn in outlying villages, and about rumors of strange sightings in Ghost Hill. She drew a circle around the central location of several sightings. It was near a cluster of weirwoods known in legend as the Grove of Night's Children. She made a mental note to gather a small party. Perhaps she'd venture there herself. Meanwhile, far to the south in King's Landing, the city still bore the scars of war. Parts of the Red Keep had collapsed during the battle with the dead. Though that final siege of Whites never reached as far south as initially feared, the capital had suffered from riots, from mad flights of refugees, from the toll of near famine. King Ryan Targaryen, a young man with silver hair cropped close to his scalp, sat the Iron Throne. He was the last living male descendant of the Targaryen line that had once ruled all Westeros. The duties of the crown weighed heavily on him. Between feuding lords, the cost of rebuilding, and the ever-present threat of renewed strife, he found sleep elusive. His court was beset by rumors that the North was stirring with unknown powers. Spies' reports, carried by ravens, whispered of the children of the forest re-emerging. Some lords dismissed such tales as hysterical superstition, but Ryan knew better. The long night had taught him to take every piece of lore seriously, no matter how fantastic it seemed. His hand, Lord Leoric's sunglass, stood beside the throne, enumerating the latest requests from the small council. We feed shortages in the Riverlands, Your Grace, Leoric said, the sound of parchment rustling in his hands. The farmland was decimated. Villages begged for coin or assistance with sowing new crops. The lords of the Trident claim they can barely support themselves, let alone tithe to the crown. King Ryan pinched the bridge of his nose. We can't afford to let the Riverlands go hungry, or we risk more uprisings. Redistribute grain from the Stormlands and the Reach. Offer them reduced taxes if they pledge men to help rebuild the roads. Leoric nodded. And regarding these sightings of small forest-dwelling creatures in the north, Ryan's crimson eyes flicked downward. He'd inherited those Targaryen eyes, and with them something of the family's long association with dragons. But there were no dragons left in Westeros, or so he'd been told all his life. I doubt we can do much from here. The North has always held its mysteries close. We'll keep watch. If the children of the forest truly walk among the weirwoods again, we can only hope they remain peaceful. We have not the resources for a new war. The hand tilted his head. Some advisors whisper that the children might pose a threat, that they might seek retribution for old wrongs. Ryan gave a half-smile. I know the stories, how the first men made peace with the children only after years of bloodshed, how they joined forces to repel the others. But those were ancient days, and the children were said to have faded away. If they come back, I suspect it's for a reason. Perhaps they wish to ensure the long night never returns, or perhaps something else stirs them. Either way, we can't ignore the possibility that more ancient forces might awaken. Thus the realm hovered in uncertainty, with rumors taking on new life. Sightings of diminutive figures who could slip through the underbrush like ghosts, whose eyes glowed with the color of emeralds and sapphires. Shepherds in the vale spoke of hearing whispered chanting under moonlight, and said that sometimes, in the corner of their vision, they'd spot a pair of eyes peering at them from behind a boulder. Farmers in the reach claimed that their crops were sprouting with unnatural vigor, as though the land itself was quickening with old magic. The citadel in Old Town sent novices north to gather testimony, for the maesters wanted to record any phenomenon that might unravel the mysteries of the realm. The novices came back with trembling voices, bearing accounts of stepping into a glade where the trees seemed alive with unearthly presence. One novice claimed to have followed a faint singing deeper into the forest, only to find a circle of trees grown so closely together that not even midday sun could pierce the canopy. Yet within that circle, the gloom felt alive, throbbing with something ancient. Westeros was battered, bruised, and by all accounts, ripe for upheaval. And upheaval came one night to a place not often whispered of in the halls of power, the Neck. This swampy region between the north and the south was haunted by mists and half-submerged watchtowers, the domain of House Reed. Few ventured there without necessity. But in the dead of night, as frogs croaked and will-o'-the-wisps glimmered over the marshes, a large gathering of figures emerged on a small hillock, ringed by cypress trees. A single weirwood stood in the center, though how it grew in the bog was anyone's guess. Pale leaves rustled, and the carved face in the trunk seemed to weep red sap. At first, none of the watchers around the tree seemed fully human. Their proportions were slightly off. Slender limbs, large, luminous eyes, hair like woven moss or autumn leaves. They made no sound as they walked, and their footprints left no trace. One among them, smaller than the rest, stepped forward. With a faint gesture, they passed a hand across the bark of the weirwood. A faint glow emanated from the carved eyes, as though responding to a silent call. The group began chanting in a soft, melodic language, ancient syllables that vibrated with the energy of a time before the first stone keep had been raised. It was a summoning, an invocation of the old gods, a tethering of long-scattered powers. From the dark waters of the swamp, shapes emerged. Large lizards, frogs with shining eyes, serpents that coiled around half-rotted logs. The entire bog seemed to hold its breath. Then, as the chanting swelled, a swirl of pale lights drifted upward, dancing among the cypress. One by one, the children placed their palms against the weirwood, and the heartbeat of that ancient tree reverberated through them like a wave. Far in the distance, the watchers in Greywater Watch, House Reed's fortress, reported seeing strange lights in the sky that night, swirling as if drawn into a vortex directly above that solitary weirwood. None dared approach, for House Reed knew the old ways and respected them. They recognized that something of primal significance was happening, and it was not their place to interfere. When dawn broke, the hillock was empty. The only sign that something had occurred was the faint glimmer in the leaves of the weirwood, as though they had been touched by a nighttime sun. And so, unnoticed by most, the children of the forest began to weave a grand tapestry of magic across Westeros once more. They touched the weirwoods in secret glades, invoked old powers under moonlit skies, and whispered to the very bones of the earth. Crops began to recover at an uncanny rate in certain areas, while in others, forests sprang up overnight where only meager scrubland had existed before. Rivers ran cleaner, fish returned in abundance, and even the air seemed clearer. But with these blessings came subtle warnings. Whole sections of roads leading deep into forests seemed to vanish or become treacherous. Men who ventured too far into the haunted groves sometimes failed to return. Strange creatures, part deer and part something else, were spotted in the twilight gloom. The lines between the natural and the supernatural began to blur. Amid these bewildering changes, Lady Arya Stark decided at last to venture out from Winterfell with a small retinue to investigate the Grove of Night's Children. She could not ignore the fact that more and more travelers reported sightings of the children, and rumor claimed the grove was their gathering place. Accompanying her were Elia Mormont and 3 other loyal companions. Sir Gerald Slate, a lean knight with a quiet disposition, Mariah Poole, a tracker from the Wolfswood with keen senses and a wry grin, and Morin, the young man from the Free Folk who had proven his bravery during the battle against the dead. They rode out at first light, crossing the patchy snowdrifts that covered the fields around Winterfell, traveling eastward into the thick stands of pines and oaks. The weather was cold but clear, and as they rode, they spoke in hushed tones, the forest around them unnervingly silent. Even the crows seemed quiet, as if they, too, were waiting. Not 2 hours into their journey, Morin caught sight of faint tracks in the snow. "Children's footprints, maybe," he murmured, squatting down and running his fingers along them. "Small, light. Could be a child's or a woman's, but the stride is odd, almost too delicate." Arya dismounted, looking at the tracks. They led deeper into the forest, meandering as though the walker had no fear of predators or watchers. "We follow them," she decided. They tethered their horses to a low branch. They dared not ride them through what could be a labyrinth, and continued on foot. The deeper they ventured, the thicker the undergrowth became. Thorny bushes seemed to bar their way, yet if they circled around a tree, the path would clear for a dozen paces, then snarl again. It felt almost as though the forest were alive, testing them or leading them. The light turned a peculiar green from the canopy. At times, Arya could have sworn she heard faint laughter or whispers, just beyond earshot. Finally, they arrived at a ring of weirwoods, ancient, stately trees whose bark shone ghost-white in the gloom. The carved faces stared down at them, some with expressions of sorrow, others with what could have been rage or curiosity. Scarlet leaves formed a tapestry overhead. The ground was soft with moss. Arya and her companions moved to the center of the ring, drawn by a gentle warmth. At the center stood a single stump, as if the largest weirwood had once been felled there long ago. A hush fell. The wind stilled. Even their breathing sounded too loud. Then, from behind the trees, 3 small figures emerged. 2 of them had skin of dusky brown-green and wore cloaks made of woven leaves. Their eyes glimmered like stars with neither malice nor overt welcome. The third figure was slightly taller, perhaps 4.5 feet, and wore a circlet of slender branches around their brow. They raised a small hand, palm outward, in what could have been greeting. Arya felt her heart pounding. She stepped forward, making no sudden movements, and bowed her head, hoping this ancient gesture of respect would transcend language barriers. "We have come seeking parley," she said, her voice steady but carrying a tremor of awe. "We are from Winterfell. We mean you no harm." Her companions stood behind her, tense but respectful. For a moment, silence hung like morning mist. Then the figure with the circlet spoke in a voice that was clear and resonant, though underpinned with a strange echo. "The harm of men has long scarred the land," they said in the common tongue, albeit lightly accented with lilting cadences. "Why do you seek us now?" Arya's pulse quickened. "Because the long night is over, but we sense more changes in the wind. We've seen signs that your people are returning. We do not wish for conflict. The realm needs healing." The childlike figure nodded solemnly. Their large eyes swept over Arya and her party, as though reading their hearts. "You speak truth, Stark child. Your line has ever been tied to the old ways, to the old gods. You have the blood of wolves in you, which we sense. Yes, the land needs healing. But men have not changed so easily since the dawn of days. They take and do not give back. They carve out roads, build castles on sacred ground, cut down ancient trees. Some among us believe men should be driven from these woods altogether. Others see the need for balance. That is why we wait, to see if men can learn, or if men will repeat their ancient sins." "Man." Arya glanced at Elia, who gave a slight nod. The tension in the air was thick. "We cannot speak for all men, but we can speak for ourselves," Arya said softly. "Winterfell was once built on grounds that were sacred to you, or so the tales say. We did not come here to impose ourselves. We ask only that we find a way to coexist. Should you require us to protect your groves, we can try. If you require resources, we can see what we can offer. Or if you want it to be left alone, we can respect that too." "Ganor," The circlet-wearing child tilted their head. And if we do not trust men's promises? A chill ran down Arya's spine. She recalled the stories of how the children of the forest had once shattered the arm of Dorne to halt the advance of the first men, using magic of cataclysmic force. All trust must be earned, she said quietly. Tell us how we can earn it. A contemplative silence followed. The smaller children murmured among themselves in their ancient tongue, which sounded like a rustling of leaves in a breeze. At length, the leader spoke. Prove that you will not ravage the land. We have begun weaving the old magics back into the soil, the water, the skies. If men can live with the new forests that sprout, if they will not burn them for new farmland, if they will not drive us away when we appear, perhaps a new balance can be struck. But know this, if men break faith, if they bring axes to our sacred trees, if they slay the creatures that live in our glades or defile the weirwoods, we will fight back with a fury greater than men have ever known. The time of the children is not ended. The songs in the wood will not fade again. Then, Arya bowed her head deeper. I understand. Elia, who had remained silent thus far, stepped forward. Is it true then, that you have touched the land in ways we cannot comprehend? We've heard that rivers run clearer, and that crops begin to flourish. Is this your doing? The two children behind their leader nodded faintly. The circlet-wearer spoke. We call upon the gifts of the old gods, upon the heartbeat of the weirwoods. The land, once blackened by the long night, awakens to our call. Yet it is a careful balance. Nature must remain wild. Man's fields, man's roads. These are scars on the body of the earth. We heal, but we must also reclaim. That is our price. A sense of awe and worry struck Arya. She knew how vital farmland was to the kingdoms, how necessary roads were for trade and travel. The children seemed to be saying that as they restored the land, it would return to a more primal state. Forests might spread into farmland, turning man's ordered squares of wheat into untamed groves. Rivers might change course. Mountains might awaken. Would that lead to conflict? Almost certainly, if the children continued without any regard for humanity's needs. Yet she also realized how battered the land was, how the long night had threatened all life. Perhaps the children's magic was the only real way for Westeros to recover. Then teach us how to live in this new balance, she said quietly. The survivors of the long night will not want to yield territory, but we must find a way. You speak with wisdom, the leader said. Yet we know that men have many kings, many lords. Would your crown in the south also agree to these terms? Arya thought of King Ryan Targaryen. He was young, but the Targaryens had once wielded dragons, forces of nature in their own right. Would he cooperate, or would he try to reassert control? I cannot speak for the Iron Throne, she admitted. But I can bring your message. I beg you to give us time to mend from the war, and share your words with our leaders. Martin. The child studied her for a moment. In that silent stare, Arya felt as though the ancient being saw everything about her. Her hopes, her fears, the tiny fractures in her heart. Go then, Wolf's daughter. Speak to your king. Tell him the land must be respected, or the land will rise against him. With that, the children moved back, slipping into the gloom among the weirwoods. Like specters in a dream, they vanished without the crunch of a single leaf. Arya stood there, stunned, her companions at her side. No one dared move for a moment, as if half expecting the forest to swallow them as well. Finally, Ser Geralt spoke in a hushed voice. We must tell the rest of the north, my lady. We must tell the realm. Arya nodded, feeling a weight on her shoulders. Yes, let us go then. We must try to avert another war, one we might not be able to win. Their journey back was strangely easier. The brambles that had tangled their way seemed to part, letting them pass with minimal trouble. Yet, in the corners of her vision, Arya spotted faint silhouettes, small figures who watched their departure. An entire people, an entire magical race, was returning to Westeros. Whether that spelled salvation or doom for the realm depended on the choices men would make. By the time they returned to Winterfell, news was already trickling in from the south. In the riverlands, entire swaths of farmland had begun to sprout thick forests. Lords wrote in desperation to their liege lords and to King's Landing. Our farmland is being overtaken by wild growth. The soil is rich, but these forests appear overnight, as if guided by sorcery. What can we do? Our men with axes find themselves lost or turned around in the thicket, and some never come back. We are seeing shapes in the leaves, voices on the wind. We fear the old magic is punishing us. The crown, still reeling from the war's devastation, had no immediate solution. Dispatching an army to cut down the forests was suggested by some. Others deemed that madness, who wanted another conflict steeped in magic, especially after barely surviving the whites. As the lords argued, the forests continued to spread, though not uniformly. Certain areas remained untouched. Villages nestled against a river might find themselves encircled by new growth, while a mile down the road, a hamlet saw no change at all. It was as though the children were selecting places of special importance, weaving a pattern invisible to mortal eyes. King Ryan Targaryen convened a great council to discuss the crisis. Lords from every region that could spare a representative arrived in King's Landing. The great hall still showed signs of damage, a half-collapsed arch, soot stains from fires. Yet the monarchy persevered, determined to maintain some semblance of stability. On the day of the council, King Ryan took his seat on the Iron Throne, wearing a simple crown of pale gold. He looked weary, though his youth softened the lines of care. Gathered before him were lords and ladies of noble houses. From the Reach, the Tyrells, reduced in numbers since the war. From Dorne, the Martells, still proud and unbroken. From the Vale, the Arryns, quiet, watchful. And from the Westerlands, the Lannisters, cautious, uncertain. The North was represented by Lord Edric Stark, one of Arya's cousins, who had traveled down with her accounts of the meeting in the Grove of Night's Children. The murmurs in the hall swelled until King Ryan raised a hand for silence. "We are gathered to discuss the strange phenomenon that grips our lands," he began in a clear voice. "Reports indicate that new forests are springing up, that travelers vanish in the undergrowth, and that sightings of the children of the forest are no longer mere rumor. We cannot ignore the signs. We must decide how to respond." Then, Lord Martin Lannister stepped forward, a slim man with sharp eyes. "Your Grace, with all due respect, these forests threaten the farmland we desperately need to feed our people. We should muster axes and burn away this wild growth before it spreads further." A rumble of disagreement echoed from other lords. "You would provoke the children into open conflict?" Lady Lana Tyrell asked, her voice quivering with barely contained horror. "We have hardly recovered from one cataclysm. Must we now plunge into another? The children possess old magic. We can't be certain of victory." Then peace. "Since when did men quail before old magic?" Lord Lannister retorted. "If we do nothing, we starve. And if we let them expand unchecked, they may rule more of Westeros than the crown does in time." "Starvation is not our only concern," Lord Dane from Dorne interjected. "The deserts of Dorne have seen new springs appearing, turning patches of sand into oases. At first we rejoiced, thinking it a blessing. But now we see uncanny vines and trees rising that have no place in our climate. Our scouts vanish when they investigate. Some speak of illusions, of voices in the desert. We stand at a crossroads, uncertain which path leads to peace and which to ruin." "Nam?" At that, Lord Edric Stark stepped forward, his bearing more solemn than usual. "I have tidings from my kinswoman Lady Arya Stark," he announced. "She has spoken with the children themselves. They do not seek senseless destruction of mankind, but they demand respect for the old ways. They are reweaving magic into the land and expect men to live in harmony with this new balance. Should we resist, they promise a fury we cannot comprehend. Their intention is clear. They want to ensure that no new threat like the White Walkers can ravage the land unchecked. They see our roads, our cities, as scars upon the earth." Murmurs flared up again, some scornful, others fearful. King Ryan raised his hand once more. So, if we do not burn these new forests, how do we feed our people? If farmland reverts to wilderness, we face famine. Lord Edric hesitated but pressed on. The children say that crops can thrive under their magic, but not in the manner we're accustomed to. They are reshaping the land so that nature flourishes. Perhaps we must adapt, learn new methods. They imply that they can help the land yield more bountiful harvests if we respect the boundaries they set. Ben or Seacal? How can we trust them? Lord Martin Lannister demanded. They nearly destroyed the First Men once. Before Lord Edric could respond, King Ryan tapped an armored finger on the arm of the throne. We have no easy answers. We stand on the brink of another war, one we're ill-prepared to fight. We cannot feed armies, nor can we easily outmatch magic that has awakened the very bones of the earth. Yet the realm will collapse if we do nothing, if farmland and roads vanish overnight. We must negotiate, but we must also prepare for the possibility that they will not accept compromise. A delegation should be sent to these children, comprised of lords and maesters, to treat with them. If they refuse to yield any portion of the land, we must consider our next steps. And so it was decided. A delegation would travel north to the Neck, rumored to be a major stronghold of the children. It was said that Greywater Watch was afloat in the mists of the bog, and that its Lord Howland Reed's descendants were well versed in the ways of the old magic. They might serve as intermediaries between men and the children. Many lords were uneasy, but they saw little choice. Another war could doom an already exhausted realm. The delegation comprised maesters from Old Town, knights and lords, with a vested interest in forging peace. Lord Edric Stark represented the North, while Lord Lannister insisted on joining to ensure the safety of Westerland interests. Lady Lana Tyrell went to observe, and from the Vale came a cousin of House Royce, famed for their abiding respect for runic lore. They set out from King's Landing with a small retinue, traveling northward under the banner of parley. They carried gifts, seeds of many crops, precious books from the Citadel that detailed advanced farming techniques, bits of gold and silver to demonstrate sincerity, though few believed the children would care about such metal. The journey was fraught with obstacles. Banditry had risen in certain regions, driven by desperation and hunger. No one wanted a delegation of aristocrats and maesters traveling alone. A modest force of the Crown's Guard accompanied them, but they were under strict orders to avoid conflict whenever possible. As they approached the edges of the Neck, the land grew wetter, the roads turning to muddy tracks. The party had to use small boats to traverse flooded sections of road. Swarms of biting insects tested their patience, and only the stoic knowledge of the Reed's guides prevented them from becoming hopelessly lost. Mists shrouded the wetlands, giving each bend of the waterway an eerie quality. Sometimes, the tall grasses rustled, and the knights reached for their swords, but saw only glimmers of movement, no tangible threat. Finally, they reached Greywater Watch, the floating fortress rumored to move from one location to another in the swamp. Its wooden walls and watchtowers loomed out of the fog, giving them a fleeting sense of safety. Within, Lord Ryman Reed, a stooped but sharp-eyed man, greeted them politely. His people were few but hardy, and they regarded these visitors with curiosity. "I've never known so many high lords to visit my humble domain," Ryman Reed said wryly, ushering them into a dimly lit hall. "I gather you come on business beyond simply paying respects." Lord Lannister gave a brisk nod. "We seek the children of the forest who dwell in these marshes. We wish to treat with them, to find terms by which we may coexist." Reed's eyes glimmered with an enigmatic smile. "You think to find them as one might find a castle or a holdfast? Their ways are not so direct. They appear when they choose." "Then help us," Edric Stark said. "We know your house is close to the old ways. We know that you share an ancient friendship with the children." Ryman Reed stroked his gray-streaked beard. "We have heard their whispers in the night. They are indeed here. I cannot command them, but I can prepare a meeting place. If they deem you worthy of parley, they will come." The next day, as a sickle moon rose over the bog, Ryman Reed led the delegation by torchlight to a cypress grove where a single weirwood stood, its trunk twisted and bent, half submerged in swampy water. The reflection of the carved face shimmered in the still dark surface. Fireflies danced in the gloom, and the air was thick with the tang of wet earth. The delegation formed a half-circle around Reed, who extinguished his torch and began chanting softly, an ancient chant that predated the faith of the Seven, taught to his house long ago. The delegates felt a prickle along their skin, as if the air itself had charged with hidden power. Slowly, from the darkness beyond the cypress, small shapes glided into view. Some approached on mossy banks, others slipped out of the water itself, only their eyes visible at first. A hush blanketed the gathering. The children of the forest stood before them, perhaps 24 in number, each with slightly different features, some with hair like lichen, others with hair like a swirl of autumn leaves. Their eyes ranged in color from pale gold to deepest emerald, but they all shared an otherworldly grace, a silence that spoke volumes. One stepped forward, taller than most, with eyes the color of amethyst. Lord Ryman Reed inclined his head. "Friends," he whispered in a voice trembling with respect, "these are the emissaries I spoke of. They come to seek your terms for peace." The tall child regarded the men and women assembled. They wore no circlet, but something about them radiated power. They turned their gaze upon Edric Stark first. "Wolves of Winterfell always come seeking truth in the old ways. Speak." Edric drew a slow breath. "We have heard that you reclaim the land, drawing forests over farmland, reshaping deserts into groves. We do not deny your right to nurture the earth, but humanity struggles to survive. We implore you to allow us farmland enough to feed our people, roads enough to connect our settlements. We wish for no war. Our realm is weary." Another child, this one with bark-like skin, spoke in a voice as soft as a breeze. "Your metal cities and stone keep strangle the land. They have starved the old magic for too long. The horrors of the long night came in part because the balance was broken. Men warred among themselves, spilled blood that stained the rivers, cut down the children of the forest, the children of the earth. We cannot allow that to happen again." Nanasano, Lord Lannister, who had been quiet, stepped forward. "We understand your grievances, yet men must build to protect themselves. Castles keep out raiders, roads allow trade. These are not sins but necessities. We beg you not to see every city as an abomination." A ripple of uneasy murmurs passed among the children. "You speak of trade, of building," the amethyst-eyed leader said. "These are the ways of men, which drive them to carve up the land like butchers. Our kind lived in harmony with the land, never building walls of stone, never forging metal swords. When men arrived, they slaughtered our kin, took our forest homes. Even so, we once made peace with men. That peace was broken over the centuries." "Noam?" Maester Arwood, a tall, bespectacled scholar from the Citadel, stepped forward, clasping his hands. "Honored ones, if we might propose a compromise. We have knowledge to share of agriculture that can coexist with forested lands, methods that do not rely on wide swaths of cleared fields. We have the means to cultivate smaller, more sustainable spaces. If you permit, we can show these methods to the realm, so we might rely less on destructive practices. In return, we ask you to keep certain vital areas free of overt forestation, so that men's settlements can remain. We can even help replant older forests around them, lessening our footprint." Nestim. Several children exchanged glances. A hush weighed upon the grove. Finally, the leader spoke. "Men's tongues can be forked, promising harmony then delivering betrayal. Yet we sense sincerity among some of you. The old gods whisper to us that the realm stands at a crossroads. If men truly wish to live in harmony, we will allow farmland. We will not uproot your roads. But any new expansion, any new mines or sprawling cities built without regard for the land, will be seen as a breach of faith. We shall watch every region. If men keep their word, we will teach them gifts of growing, blessings of the weirwoods, so that each acre yields more fruit than it ever did under your plows and scythes." And then anyhow, Lord Lannister seemed almost relieved. "That is a generous offer if it holds. But how do we ensure that unscrupulous lords or small folk do not break faith by cutting down the new forests, or burning them for farmland. Meanwhile, the amethyst-eyed child raised a slender hand, and a swirl of flickering lights appeared above the water, dancing like a constellation. We are everywhere. We see through the weirwoods. We feel the footsteps on the roots. If you break faith, we shall know. Then we will act. This is our final warning. Lord Edric, taking a risk, slowly knelt on one knee before them. We accept these terms, he said, looking up at the children. On behalf of the North, I pledge to uphold this new balance. Maester Arwood, also bowing, added, and we from the Citadel shall do our utmost to spread knowledge and ensure men respect these forests. We ask only for time to teach them. A tense silence followed. Then the leader of the children inclined their head, a gesture of acceptance. With that, the swirl of lights vanished, and many of the children stepped back, blending into the darkness. The amethyst-eyed one gave a final glance, as though memorizing the faces of each delegate, before disappearing into the mist. The meeting was concluded. Relief washed over the lords and ladies. Some quietly wept, tears of fear or hope or both. They had a chance at peace, precarious though it might be. Over the next few days, they remained at Greywater Watch, drafting formal statements, sealed with the sigils of each major house present, declaring a new pact with the children of the forest. These statements would be taken to King Ryan Targaryen in King's Landing for his official endorsement. It was a pledge that the crown and the major lords would not expand farmland heedlessly, nor destroy the new forests. In return, the children would bless the farmland already in existence, increasing yields, and refrain from swallowing roads or settlements in unchecked wild growth. And, implicitly, both sides recognized that any breach would bring swift repercussions. Word spread across Westeros, carried by ravens bearing scrolls stamped with the sigils of House Stark, House Lannister, House Tyrell, House Reed, and others. Reactions varied. Some small folk rejoiced, as their crops began to flourish in ways they never had before. Others worried that a single misstep by a reckless lord or band of outlaws could reignite hostilities. The faith of the Seven was uneasy. Their septons found themselves sharing prayer time with old gods, for the population recognized the tangible power behind the weirwood groves. The Citadel, after some debate, began rewriting treatises on agriculture and forest management, distributing new knowledge among the maesters assigned to lords across the realm. The name, Children of the Forest, was no longer relegated to dusty tomes and half-believed legends. It was now a living presence in daily life. In the months that followed, a startling transformation took hold. Fields once meager now yielded bountiful harvests. Fruit trees bore sweeter, larger fruits. Rivers teemed with fish. The long night scars began to fade more quickly than anyone expected. Towns in the north reported healthier livestock, with fewer diseases afflicting them. Even in the once scorched Vale of Arryn, greenery returned in full measure. Many praised the children, leaving offerings of flowers at the edges of forests, or singing old songs at the weirwood hearts of their godswoods. While some zealots in the faith called this heresy, moderate septons found ways to incorporate thankfulness for nature into their sermons, bridging the gap. Yet, human nature being what it was, not everyone abided by the pact. In a remote corner of the Westerlands, a minor lord named Harlan Serret sought to reclaim a copper mine deep in the forest. The mine had been sealed during the war, rumored to be haunted. But the promise of wealth was too great a temptation. Lord Serret sent a party of miners and sellswords to cut away the new growth. They worked for several days, clearing a path to the mine entrance, felling old oaks that had sprung up in the forest's resurgence. Their axes bit into living wood, and the trees fell in great crashes. On the fifth day, the forest struck back. The miners awoke to find vines wrapped around their limbs, dragging them into the undergrowth. Some cried out, only to have moss and leaves fill their mouths, silencing them. Sellswords brandished torches, but the flames sputtered out in an inexplicable dampness. The ground itself seemed to sink beneath them, pulling them into quagmires that formed where only solid earth had been the day before. Those who survived fled, babbling of creatures in the trees, small forms with eyes aglow, unleashing arcs of emerald magic that split the night. Lord Serret, enraged at the loss of men and opportunity, vowed revenge. He raised what forces he could, intending to march into the forest and burn it to the ground. Word of this reached King's Landing, and King Ryan dispatched a royal envoy to warn him, "Seize this breach of the pact, or face the king's justice." But pride and greed consumed Lord Serret. He advanced his men into the forest, torches raised, with archers firing flaming arrows into the canopy. The response was swift, brutal. From hidden vantage points, the children unleashed a storm of dragon glass-tipped arrows that glowed with uncanny light. Serret's men fell screaming, black veins spiderwebbing from the wounds as if the arrows carried a poison older than time. Thick roots tore out of the earth to ensnare horse and rider alike, dragging them into the hungry darkness. Towering illusions of ancient beasts flickered among the trees, disorienting the attackers. Some men fled in terror, only to discover that the forest changed around them, leading them in circles until they collapsed from exhaustion or vanished into sudden sinkholes. In mere hours, Serret's force was destroyed. Serret himself never emerged. Some said the vines took him, and that his screams echoed until dawn. News of the massacre spread like wildfire. Westeros collectively shuddered, reminded that the new peace was as delicate as a spider's silk. King Ryan, alarmed and angered, proclaimed that any lord who violated the pact would face the full wrath of the throne. The crown's men seized the Serret lands, placing them under the administration of a more compliant branch of the family. To quell further dissent, King Ryan ordered that any expansion or exploitation of newly wooded areas must be approved by the crown and overseen by citadel maesters. In the face of so stark a warning, the lords grudgingly complied. Most did not wish to see their men devoured by living forests. Thus, the children's influence grew, not through conquest, but through the fear and respect their powers commanded. Over the next several years, a cautious equilibrium took shape. Certain swaths of forest, recognized as sacred or infused with strong magic, were declared off-limits. Many men avoided them altogether, spooked by tales of vengeful spirits or illusions. In return, the children continued to bless existing farmland and help re-establish bountiful orchards around towns and villages. As the harvests flourished, people's bellies filled. The threat of famine receded, and with it, some measure of acceptance toward these strange new overlords of the natural world. Yet, overlords might have been too strong a word, for the children did not demand taxes or forcibly govern. They ruled through the roots and the leaves, through whispered songs in the night, ensuring that men never forgot their presence. Instead of a king on a throne, the old gods of the weirwoods and the strange magic of the children shaped the realm's direction. Some small folk even began to worship them openly, leaving offerings of seeds and honey at the borders of the enchanted forests. Over time, the children would sometimes manifest in villages at dusk, healing sick livestock or blessing a well with purifying magic. Their seldom-seen visits reinforced the sense that men's daily prosperity hinged on their cooperation with these ancient beings. Meanwhile, Lady Arya Stark found herself caught in the swirl of changing tides. She traveled the north, guiding local lords to work with the children rather than against them. The forests in the Wolf's Wood and beyond deepened, yet carefully avoided swallowing farmland as long as the men of the north maintained respect. She gained a reputation as a bridge between the old ways and the new, forging understanding where distrust might otherwise have grown. Occasionally, she ventured south to King's Landing to counsel King Ryan, offering perspective on the children's mindset and powers. Their alliance was uneasy at times, but both recognized that forcing conflict would doom Westeros to another cataclysm. King Ryan himself grappled with a shift in power. The Targaryens had once commanded dragons, unstoppable forces that dwarfed any magic of men. Yet these new forest magics and the illusions conjured by the children were beyond his command. No dragon stirred in the land. His hold on the Iron Throne now relied on balancing human politics with the demands of an ancient race. Some of his advisors whispered that if dragons ever returned, they could cow the forests, but Ryan did not share such illusions. The last dragons had died generations ago, and the Targaryen line had not displayed any ability to reawaken them. So he ruled as best he could, a cautious caretaker of a realm whose real caretaker might well be the weirwoods themselves. As seasons turned, as snows fell and melted again, Westeros transformed. The devastation of the long night receded into memory. New roads were constructed, but designed to minimize destruction of the forests. Laid out under the guidance of maesters and the watchful eye of the children, who occasionally left cryptic symbols near a path under construction, warning men if they strayed too far. Castles that had once been the seats of power were partially reclaimed by greenery. Ivy draped their walls, moss filled their courtyards, and lords learned to coexist with the creeping life. Some took pride in their new environment, calling their seats living castles, blending stone with vine. Others grumbled, remembering days of unchallenged dominion. Even the faith of the Seven adapted, erecting modest septs in newly forested areas that featured open-air designs, allowing branches and vines to coil around columns. The High Septon, an older man who had witnessed the horrors of the long night, declared that nature's renewal was a sign of the mother's mercy and the father's wisdom. In so doing, he maintained a delicate truce between old and new beliefs. The Citadel in Old Town became a hive of scholarship, updating histories, writing new treatises on the interaction between man and nature, and collecting accounts of the children's magic. Younger maesters, unburdened by the cynicism of their predecessors, saw in this new age a chance to learn secrets lost for millennia. While some older maesters remained suspicious of magic, the general sentiment shifted to cautious acceptance. After all, Westeros was thriving in a way no one could deny. Occasionally, disputes flared. Ambitious minor lords or robber knights sought to exploit a forest for quick gain, only to meet with lethal consequences. Each time, word spread, reinforcing that the pact was real and the children would tolerate no breach. Over time, fewer and fewer dared test the boundaries. Hunger and desperation, once the catalysts for war, now receded as bountiful harvests ensured that most were fed. The impetus for conquest dwindled. While the realm was not without conflict, intrigue, personal feuds, and power plays still existed, wars of expansion or devastation became near impossible. The land itself would rebel. In time, the realm's center of gravity shifted away from the Iron Throne as the singular source of authority. While King Rion and his successors continued to govern men, the children governed the earth. Many now said that Westeros had two rulers, the dragon-blooded king in King's Landing, and the silent watchers in the forests, answerable only to the old gods. It was an arrangement unlike anything in recorded history, a layered sovereignty of magic and monarchy. For the majority of small folk, life improved under this arrangement. Crop yields soared. Diseases that once plagued them became rarer. With roads carefully preserved, trade persisted, albeit with extra caution in forested areas. Some even began to say that the realm was entering a golden age, a time where man and nature flourished together. But golden ages are not forged without tension. Fear and wonder walked hand in hand. Rumors circulated about the children's hidden enclaves, about secret rites under the moon that no human was allowed to witness. Some believed the children used men as pawns, manipulating them with illusions and half-gifts of magic. Others believed that the children were benevolent guardians, ensuring that the cataclysm of the long night would never repeat. Still, whenever men walked among the thick groves or stood beneath weirwoods older than kingdoms, they felt eyes upon them. The wind carried faint melodies, half lament, half celebration. The children of the forest had, in a sense, returned to rule, although rule was not the right word for it. They reigned in shadows, in the hush of dawn across an untouched meadow, in the twining roots that cracked cobblestones, in the slow, inevitable growth of vine around a once impenetrable fortress. Those who tried to defy them realized quickly that Westeros itself was no longer an ally for man's aggression. Decades passed, and the memory of the White Walkers receded into legend. A new generation grew up knowing only prosperity, the land brimming with life, the weirwood groves a place of reverence rather than fear. Children learned to read and write under trees that whispered of older times. Song and story told of a dark night banished by unity among men, but overshadowed now by a deeper knowledge that they shared the realm with older, stranger kin. Wise men and women recognized that this arrangement was fragile, that if men's ambition surged once more, the wrath of the forests would be unbound. But for that season, Westeros existed in a state of delicate grace. Lady Arya Stark, older now, with silver flecks in her dark hair, found peace in this new order. She remembered how Winterfell had once been a battered shell, its proud towers crumbled by the armies of the dead. Now it stood entwined with vines that bloomed small white flowers in spring, the thickening forests around it teeming with deer and the occasional deer wolf that prowled unseen. The deer wolves, too, made a slow resurgence, guided by some primal magic. Arya often walked in the Godswood at dusk, listening to the sigh of the ancient weirwood, feeling the presence of the children who sometimes watched her from behind the trunk. She was neither their master nor their subject, merely a caretaker of the covenant. One evening, as she knelt by the black pool that reflected the heart tree, she felt a soft presence beside her. A single child emerged, slender and small, wearing a cloak of moss and the faintest glow about their person. For a long moment, neither spoke. The old god's presence seemed to fill the air, a calm hush that bound them together. "Do you still fear us, Wolf's daughter?" the child asked softly. Arya considered, gazing into the child's opalescent eyes. "I fear what might happen if men forget this balance and let greed guide them," she answered honestly. "But I do not fear you. We were all but lost when the White Walkers marched. Your power, your magic, has restored much of what was lost. I am grateful." "Me." The child tilted their head, the leaf-shaped ears catching the moonlight. "We remain vigilant, for men's hearts can shift like the tides, but in you we find hope. In the realm that chooses life over conquest, we find harmony. So long as the old ways are remembered, the land will remain strong." A faint breeze rustled the red leaves of the weirwood, sending soft ripples across the black pool. Arya felt tears sting her eyes, remembering all those who had died, all the battles fought and lost, all the heartbreak. "Will it last?" she whispered, almost afraid of the answer. The child offered no easy assurances. They merely placed a small hand upon Arya's, cool as morning dew. "Nothing is forever. Seasons change. We can only nurture each moment of balance, each day of peace. If men stand beside us, we shall endure together. If they stray, the land will correct them." Many. In that moment, Arya thought of the countless lives across Westeros, farmers who tilled fields that now yielded more grain than they ever had, fishermen whose nets came back heavy with fish, children who grew up without the shadow of war or the dread of the dead. She thought, too, of the wild glades in the neck, the shimmering marsh lights that revealed the children dancing in secret circles, weaving spells that kept the realm green and thriving. The future was no certain promise, but at least now, the present was bright and alive in a way no one could have imagined during the dark terror of the long night. A hush fell over the Godswood as the child withdrew into the gloom, leaving Arya alone with her thoughts and the reflection of the weirwood face, which seemed to watch her with an inscrutable sadness. She bowed her head, sensing the quiet acceptance of something older than time. Rising, she breathed in the night air and allowed herself a moment of solace. All across Westeros, men and women slept under canopies of living green or stone walls draped in ivy, untroubled by hunger or the dread of undead armies. The tears on her lashes were not of sorrow, but of a strange, hopeful yearning for a realm that might truly have found its way beyond war, guided by the quiet power of those who had outlived its every age and would be there long after the last mortal breath was taken. The new dawn found the forests humming with life, fields golden and lush, and streams singing across rocks polished by centuries. The children of the forest did not sit upon a throne of swords, nor did they brandish crowns of gold. They had no need. They ruled in the hush of dawn, in the night's hidden glades, and in the hearts of those who remembered the old tales. And in that memory lay the key to Westeros' survival and splendor. an unspoken covenant that men and children alike would strive to keep. A crisp dawn spread its pale light over the ramparts of Winterfell, illuminating the ivy-traced stones and the frosted leaves that blanketed the courtyards. Though it was early in the day, the air already carried that soft hush unique to the far north, broken only by the occasional whicker of horses and the muted chatter of guards changing shifts. Inside the Godswood, Lady Arya Stark stood at the edge of the black pool, staring at her own reflection in the still water. She looked older than her years, lines of care etched around her eyes, faint silver streaking her dark hair, yet a quiet resolve strengthened her posture. The northern breeze stirred the red leaves of the heart tree, sending a rain of crimson leaflets across her boots. For a moment, she allowed her mind to drift back to the days just after the long night. Back then, when the realm stood in tatters, she had believed that survival alone was victory. But survival had demanded new pacts, and fate had entangled her with the children of the forest. She remembered with aching clarity the terror and awe she had felt upon seeing them in the flesh. Small, lithe silhouettes in the gloom, eyes glimmering like distant stars. They had spoken of weaving old magic into the land, of reversing the scars left by men and war. The realm had changed, forests sprouting in place of farmland blooming with unearthly abundance in exchange for men's promise not to expand heedlessly. It was the kind of arrangement that no one would have believed possible a generation earlier. An ancient race quietly reigning over the heartbeat of Westeros, while a mortal king sat the Iron Throne and oversaw the affairs of men. She could still hear the child's voice in her mind. Nothing is forever. Seasons change. We can only nurture each moment of balance, each day of peace. And in the quiet gloom of the Godswood, she had felt both hope and dread at those words. Would men truly learn to respect the land, or would their old ambitions flare anew, driving them to test the children's patience? Her reflection in the dark pool shifted, as though rippled by an unseen disturbance. Arya glanced up, her gaze sweeping the twilight under the interlaced branches. She saw nothing, yet she sensed a presence, delicate as a breeze, watchful as a hawk. Somewhere among the ancient trunks, a child might be observing her, half blended into the moss and the twisting roots. She wondered if they approved of how the North had handled the new pact. Stepping away from the pool, she made her way along the mossy path that led out of the Godswood. As she passed beneath the carved face of the heart tree, she offered a quiet thanks for the relative peace that had reigned for years. Despite the occasional violence, like Lord Serret's disastrous attempt to expand into a forbidden forest, the realm had largely abided by the new rules. Harvests were plentiful, disease was rare, and winter seemed mild. Even so, she felt an undercurrent of tension. Men's hearts were fickle. Sooner or later, someone would try again to challenge the new order. She emerged from the Godswood into the courtyard, where the morning's bustle was in full swing. Stable hands tending to horses, stewards hurrying about with baskets of bread, maids carting laundry across the yard. The castle walls, partly entwined by vines, seemed almost alive, each stone softened by nature's slow reclamation. Arya paused to watch two stable hands coaxing vines away from a stable door. They were careful not to cut or burn them, mindful of the old warnings. One of the stable hands glanced at her, recognized her station, and offered a hasty bow. She nodded in return, then continued into the great keep. Up the winding stairs, she entered a modest solar that served as her study and meeting room. Thick furs covered the floors, and large windows let in the timid northern light. On a table of old oak lay several scrolls bearing the sigils of various northern houses: Mormont, Glover, Serwyn, Tallheart. She noticed fresh messages as well. Ravens had been busy overnight. Her steward, Bartram, a thin man with a quiet demeanor, waited by the window. "My lady," he said, inclining his head. "A raven arrived from White Harbor at daybreak. Lord Wyman Manderley's letter awaits your attention." "Thank you, Bartram," she replied, taking the sealed scroll. She broke the green wax with the back of a small knife and unrolled the parchment. Bartram drifted discreetly toward the corridor, giving her space to read. Arya's eyes flicked across the lines of looping script. The letter began with the customary pleasantries, hopes for her health and the well-being of Winterfell, then moved on to urgent business. Lord Wyman Manderley wrote of unusual ships docking at White Harbor, bearing exotic goods and news from Essos. The travelers claimed to have glimpsed green winds and strange phenomena off the coasts, as though the forests of Westeros were not confined to land alone. Some whispered that tangles of seaweed, unnaturally large and possessed of glowing filaments, had begun to drift southward from the shivering sea. Mariners spoke of uncanny storms that seemed to stir in the far north before fading, as if patrolling the waters between Westeros and the polar ice. Arya set the letter aside, her brow furrowed. Could it be that the children's magic was spreading into the seas? The notion unsettled her. She had once heard that the children existed not only in forests, but in the deep caves, even in the watery caverns beneath the land. No one truly knew the extent of their domain. If the changes in Westeros spread beyond the coasts, would that bring new threats, or new wonders? She turned to the next scroll, from House Glover of Deepwood Moat, reporting that the Wolf's Wood was deeper than ever, though so far farmland remained intact. However, Glover's scouts had come across a small settlement of free folk in the forest, who claimed the trees were beginning to speak. At night, they heard voices humming on the wind, voices that almost formed words in a tongue older than the old tongue. The free folk, unperturbed by the supernatural, merely made offerings at the nearest weirwood. In turn, they found game more abundant, and their huts safe from storms. The Glovers took it as a sign that the children's magic extended well beyond the known groves. A knocking roused her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting perhaps Bartram or one of her sworn allies. Instead, the door swung open to reveal Elia Mormont, who had been her close confidante these past years. Dark-haired and strong-jawed, Elia still wore the sigil of the bear on her cloak-pin, though House Mormont now lived under a strange synergy with the newly thickening forests on Bear Island. "My lady," Elia greeted, stepping in. "I hope I'm not interrupting. We've had word from the Neck. Lord Reed has sent an invitation for you to attend a gathering at Greywater Watch. They're calling it a conclave of the marsh." "Not Shannon." Arya raised an eyebrow. "A conclave?" "Apparently, the children have chosen Greywater Watch as a neutral place to meet with certain lords and leaders again. There are concerns, I hear, about expansions in the south. Some river lords are pushing the boundaries, setting up new mills or clearing brush. There have been no violent incidents, not yet, but the Watchers in the Neck sense rising tension." Arya set aside the last scroll. "So soon," she murmured, feeling a pang. A few years of relative peace, and already men test the edges. She supposed it was inevitable. Well, if Lord Reed extends an invitation, we must accept. Gather a small retinue. I'll want to see this for myself. The realm can't afford a second Serret incident." Elia nodded. "When shall we depart?" "Within a fortnight, I think. We'll need time to organize. I'll want to finalize matters here at Winterfell before I go." She rubbed her temple. "And we should send a raven to King Ryan as well. If the children are calling another assembly, the crown should be aware." "Nah." Elias' gaze flicked to the half-unrolled scrolls on the table. "More strange tidings?" she asked gently. Arya gave a half-shrug. "Lord Manderley reports ships from Essos, bringing rumors of eerie storms and unnatural sea flora. Lord Glover's scouts mentioned free folk hearing voices in the wind." She paused. "It seems the children's magic might be spreading in ways we didn't anticipate." Elia pursed her lips. "Then perhaps the conclave is timely. The children may have news that concerns all of us." "Nen?" Arya stood, crossing to the window. The early sun lit the towers of Winterfell, gilding the creeping vines in a pale gold hue. "Then we had best be prepared," she said softly. "Summon my guard, Captain Elia. We'll need an escort, but only a modest one. And find Morin if you can. He has a knack for navigating tricky situations." Elia offered a respectful nod and departed, leaving Arya to her thoughts. Greywater Watch again. She recalled her first journey there years ago, when the new pact was in its infancy. She had seen the children rise from the swamp waters, silent as mist, arrayed in numbers that had sent a chill through the gathered lords. That was the day they had laid out their demands for peaceful coexistence. The realm had complied, Mostly. But men were men, prideful, ambitious, forgetful of lessons hard learned. She feared what might happen if the conclave's counsel was ignored. Over the next fortnight, Winterfell bustled with preparations. Ravens flew in and out, carrying messages to and from the crown and other northern houses. A small party of travelers assembled in the courtyard, carefully selecting only necessary supplies. In those deepening forests and bogs around the neck, large retinues could become liabilities. Best to travel light and unobtrusive. Arya also had personal reasons for wanting fewer people around. Discussions with the children often demanded a certain intimacy, free from the posturing of a grand entourage. They departed on a clear morning, just as the sun's first rays broke over the eastern horizon. Arya rode at the head of the column, flanked by Elia Mormont and Morin. Sir Gerald Slate came along too, one of the few knights she trusted implicitly in uncertain territory. They were joined by a pair of maesters, Arwood, who had been part of the original negotiations, and a younger maester named Brenmar, who specialized in agriculture. Brenmar carried with him new research on forest farming, gleaned from the Citadel's evolving scholarship. For days they traveled south and east, crossing the White Knife at a shallow ford, then winding their way along muddy roads that led into the swampy lowlands of the Neck. The horses soon foundered in the mire, forcing the party to proceed on foot or by small skiffs along the winding waterways. The moan of frogs and the buzz of insects provided constant background noise, and the air hung thick with humidity, even in the cooler northern climate. Towering cypress and gnarled willows draped the channels, their roots forming natural tunnels. At last, Grey Water Watch rose before them, half hidden in silvery mist. As always, the fortress seemed to shift in the haze, making it difficult to pinpoint precisely where the walls stood. The boatmen from House Reed guided them carefully, their poles hitting the swamp bottom with rhythmic splashes. A hush descended on the group, the realization that they were once again at the threshold of a place closer to fable than reality. Lord Ryman Reed awaited them at a narrow dock, flanked by 2 guards clad in leather and ringmail. He was older now, leaning on a carved staff for support, but his eyes remained as keen and bright as the day Arya first met him. He gave a small, weary smile in greeting. Lady Arya. Friends, Aesiru. Welcome. Well, I trust your journey was uneventful. Arya nodded, stepping onto the firm plank of the dock. We had no trouble, my lord. Thank you for receiving us. He gestured for them to follow. The conclave assembles at dusk tonight, in a grove near the fortress. Several lords from the south have already arrived. River lords, for the most part, and some from the Vale. The children will appear as they please. He let out a soft chuckle. We can only hope that any differences will be resolved peacefully. Arya's brow furrowed. Differences. They walked along a wooden walkway suspended over the marsh. Lord Reed nodded. Indeed. Some of the river lords have begun to argue that the forests hamper the river trade. They complain that certain tributaries are choked by new growth, interfering with barges carrying grain. Others speak of expansions that were forced to halt when brambles and illusions barred the way. Tensions simmer, though no direct violence has occurred yet. The children wish to forestall a conflict before it can ignite. Arya considered this. It's good they reached out. The alternative would be another punitive demonstration. Nathirmond. Reed tapped his staff on a plank that had started to warp. Yes, men forget that the punishment for breaking the pact is swift. We do not need another tragedy like the one in the Westerlands. They arrived at a small courtyard inside Grey Water Watch. The fortress smelled of peat and damp timber, but it had a certain cozy quality to it as well. Reed directed them to modest quarters, where they could wash off the mud of the journey and rest until the gathering at dusk. Arya was glad for the respite. Though her body was still strong, extended travel through the bog strained even the hardiest of riders. As evening fell, a subtle glow lit the horizon, a luminescent haze that could have been reflected starlight or some other phenomenon. Servants led Arya and her companions to a clearing just beyond Grey Water Watch's walls, where a ring of cypress trees rose from the black water. Pale moss hung from the branches, and the water shimmered with drifting lights that might have been swamp fire or something more mysterious. Torches had been placed along the narrow pathways, their flames dancing in the gloom. Around a makeshift table of knotted cypress roots stood several lords. Among them, Arya recognized Lord Leicester, Lord Vance, and Lady Bracken from the Riverlands. There were a few from the Vale as well, cousins of House Royce, wearing subtle runic emblems. All looked weary, their clothing stained by the bog. They greeted Arya cordially, with a mix of respect and relief. She was known for her impartial counsel where matters of the children were concerned, and it seemed they hoped her presence would ensure fair negotiations. Indeed, from the tension in the air, she sensed that arguments had already begun. Lord Vance stepped forward, expression grim. "Lady Arya, we're glad you've arrived. We need your insight. Our shipments down the Red Fork have been delayed by these new woods creeping along the banks. Barges get stuck in thick root tangles, and men vanish trying to clear them. We've lost valuable time and coin." Before Arya could respond, Lady Bracken interjected, her voice tight with frustration. "And we've had to reroute grain shipments, traveling hours longer just to skirt around certain sections of the forest. My people grow anxious. We rely on trade." Lord Leicester, older and calmer, raised a hand. "No one denies the pact, but the expansions of the forest, shouldn't they remain outside major waterways? The Crown assured us as much, yet here we are." Arya took a measured breath. "The pact states that existing farmland and major trade routes would be preserved, while men promised not to expand into new territory. The question is whether the forests are truly invading these channels, or if the waterways have shifted. The children's magic might be altering the course of rivers in subtle ways. We must negotiate a correction if possible." A slender figure emerged from the darkness behind the cypress ring, startling some of the lords. Arya recognized him. Morin, the free folk scout who had joined them in Winterfell, had merely drifted away earlier to gather his own observations of the area. He spoke softly, his accent carrying the lilt of someone who once roamed the true north. "I've traveled those rivers recently," he said. "It's not so much that the forest invades them, it's that silt and new growth in the banks are rerouting smaller tributaries, causing the flow to change. The children's trees can adapt quickly to new conditions, growing roots in places men never expected." Lord Vance's gaze hardened. "Then, how do we do trade if we can't control the waterways? The realm needs commerce to survive." Arya met his stare evenly. "We'll bring this issue to the children. Perhaps they can ensure certain corridors remain navigable. But we must also adapt. The old ways of cutting new canals or dredging at will might no longer be acceptable." As if in response, a ripple of silence suddenly washed over the clearing. The frogs ceased croaking, the night insects hushed. From the darkness among the cypress, small figures slipped into view. A dozen or more, each barely reaching the height of a human child. Their skin tones ranged from bark brown to mossy green, eyes gleaming with unnatural luminescence. A hush fell over the lords. Though they had witnessed the children before, each new encounter still rattled nerves. The children never made a sound in approach, never rustled a leaf. One child stepped forward, amethyst-eyed and cloaked in living moss. Arya recognized them from their earlier negotiations, though the children rarely gave names as men understood them. They raised a delicate hand, palm outward, as though to greet or caution. "We have gathered to resolve the disquiet among men. Our roots tell us the rivers carry anger and frustration. We wish to ease these burdens." Lord Reed bowed respectfully, then gestured for the assembled lords to do likewise. Most obeyed with varying degrees of reluctance. Arya inclined her head in a gesture of respect. "We thank you for hearing us." The amethyst-eyed child swept its gaze over them. "Speak of your troubles." Lord Leicester, being the most composed among the river lords, took a step forward. "Your magic has fostered great bounty in our fields, and for that we're grateful. But the new growth along our rivers, your forest, has made it difficult for barges to pass. Men become lost or vanish if they attempt to clear the routes. We fear a halt to trade, which would harm the realm." A faint rustling passed among the children, as though they communicated silently. One with hair the color of willow leaves spoke in a light, chiming voice. The land reclaims what it once was. Rivers shift course over centuries, but our magic hastens the process to heal scars. The old gods do not see your barges as more important than the health of the water. Nian. Lord Vance tried to keep his tone respectful. We do not ask to harm the rivers, only to preserve a corridor for our vessels. Is there no way to shape the forest so that trade can continue while the land also thrives? The amethyst-eyed child closed those strange, lidless eyes, as though considering. In some places, we can guide the routes away from the main channel, reinforcing the banks. In others, the river is meant to run free, and your barges must find new paths. We do not wish to starve men, but neither can we allow destruction in the name of commerce. Arya ventured to speak. We understand. Could there be a system by which men work with the children's guidance to dredge or clear only minimal areas for navigation, ensuring no wanton destruction of the newly grown trees? You would have final say, but men could help maintain the channels if it's done carefully under your watch. A ripple of whispers passed among the children again. Finally, the amethyst-eyed one nodded slowly. It may be done, if each region seeking to maintain a water route first sends word to the watchers of the forest. We shall send envoys to oversee the clearing. Men who break faith, who cut beyond what is permitted, will face swift retribution. But if you abide by our counsel, a channel may remain open. Relief flitted across the faces of Lord Leicester and Lady Bracken. But Lord Vance still appeared uneasy. Perhaps the notion of subservience to the forest rankled him. Arya sensed it. She stepped beside him, voice low, though everyone in the clearing could hear. This is the best outcome we can hope for. The children are not refusing trade altogether. They only require respect for the land. Vance swallowed hard, then dipped his head in a stiff bow. We'll comply, he said, though his expression suggested that it chafed him to do so. Still, he knew better than to provoke a conflict. No one had forgotten Lord Serret's fate. The amethyst-eyed child turned to face Arya directly, tilting their head as though reading her thoughts. There is more to be discussed, they said in their lilting cadence. Men speak of changes in the seas, of green lights in the northern waters. They wonder if these are also our doing. We sense disturbances in distant currents, carried on the tides. Arya drew a breath. We've received reports of that, yes. Ships coming from Essos have seen strange storms, glowing seaweed. Lord Manderley writes that some sailors claim the sea itself is coming alive around the shivering sea. Is that the children's magic? It is the earth's magic, which we help nurture. The seas connect to the rivers, which connect to the streams, which connect to the roots of the land. All is one. In the dawn of days, the waters were also our domain, though men did not know us there. If the waters heal, they may bring forth new wonders and new dangers. Creatures from the deep may awaken, stirred by the old songs. We do not command them as easily as we do the trees. The seas are more ancient than we. A ripple of apprehension passed through the group. The notion of unknown sea beasts or storms shaped by primal magic gave everyone pause. The Royces exchanged uneasy glances. Morin, the free folk scout, asked quietly, so the seas might spawn threats we can't negotiate with. Perhaps, replied the child, unblinking. Or perhaps wonders that benefit the realm. The waters have memory, older even than the forests. They may remember the shapes of monstrous things, or the shapes of healing currents. Arya's mind raced. She recalled old legends told by the Ironborn of leviathans and sea dragons, ancient horrors that lurked in the black depths. If these legends had any kernel of truth, they might reemerge in a world newly awakened to magic. What would you have us do? She asked. The child's gaze flicked to the watery gloom of the marsh. Be vigilant. We help the land heal, but we cannot halt every stirring. If men see a monstrous threat in the seas, they must prepare. Yet warring blindly against it might upset the balance again. We counsel caution, not conquest. Trust the sea as you trust the forest. Move slowly. Respect its power. Move slowly. Lord Leicester spread his hands. But how do we do that? Our domain is the rivers and fields, not the ocean. If these sea changes spread, we may have to rely on the Crown's fleets to handle any threat. Miss Schmuel. Arya cleared her throat. King Ryan must be informed at once. The royal fleet might stand ready to defend the coasts, but only if we know what we're defending against. We should gather more information before leaping to arms. The last thing we want is to trigger a fight with something ancient. The assembly murmured in agreement. Even Lord Vance seemed subdued by the idea of waking horrors from the deep. The amethyst-eyed child stepped back, letting the cypress shadows envelop them for a moment. From behind, another child emerged, this one with bark-like skin and white streaks in their hair, reminiscent of old driftwood. Their voice held the rasp of waves scraping a rocky shore. We shall speak again of these waters. For now, if men abide by the new instructions and keep the trade routes minimal, we shall not hinder. The land will remain bountiful. A few more negotiations followed in the hush of that swampy clearing. The children agreed to designate watchers for certain key points along the major rivers. The river lords promised to alert them before any attempt to clear obstacles or routes. In exchange, the children pledged that they would not let the forests encroach further onto farmland, so long as no new expansions by men took place. There was even talk of establishing specialized wards, small carved totems, placed at river junctions, signifying permitted trade channels. A detail that would have seemed laughable in the old days, but now seemed both practical and necessary. When the meeting concluded, the children vanished into the darkness as silently as they'd come, leaving only faint footprints in the moss. The lords and their retinues breathed sighs of relief, though the tension in the clearing did not fully dissipate. After some polite farewells, they began to disperse back toward Greywater Watch. Arya lingered, her gaze drawn to the swirl of pale lights drifting among the cypress roots, floating orbs that might have been swamp gas or the lingering echoes of the children's magic. She wondered if she should attempt to speak further with the amethyst-eyed child. But they were gone along with their kin, leaving behind only that intangible presence that made the back of her neck prickle. Morin tapped her shoulder lightly, his expression thoughtful. It was not so many years ago that men laughed at tales of the children, he remarked. Now we practically petition them for trade routes. Arya managed a thin smile. The realm has changed, Morin. We must change with it. Now. He nodded, and together they made their way back to the fortress, stepping carefully along the slick wooden walkway. In the courtyard, the riverlords were still absorbed in muttered debate, expressions a mixture of grudging acceptance and frustration. Ilia Mormont waited near an unlit brazier, arms folded. She brightened upon seeing Arya but quickly took on a solemn tone. "What do you think, my lady?" she asked. "Will they keep their word?" Arya glanced at the riverlords, remembering the resentful set of Vance's jaw. "They'll try, at least until their next crisis." She sighed, raking her fingers through her hair. "The realm still needs time to adjust, but we've staved off war for now. Let's hope it holds." That night, Greywater Watch hosted a modest feast for the lords and delegates who had braved the journey. The fare was simple: fish stewed in herbs, bread baked from the mander's abundant wheat, swamp-grown vegetables, and a decent stock of mead. Conversation was subdued, overshadowed by the presence of the children and the warnings about the sea. Lord Reed, presiding with gentle authority, offered occasional toasts to unity and peace. Some lords responded with half-hearted cheers, others with polite silence. Arya noted that most simply wanted to eat, drink, and retire, exhausted by the tension. In a small side chamber off the main hall, a group of them gathered privately. Arya, Elia, Morin, Sir Gerald Slate, Maester Arwood, and Lord Ryman Reed. They sat around a low wooden table near a flickering lantern, the walls hung with swamp-green tapestries. Reed poured them each a cup of a mild liquor distilled from marsh plants, passing them around with an apologetic smile. "It's not Arbor Gold," he said, "but it'll warm the bones." Arya sipped politely, wincing at the strong, bitter aftertaste. "Lord Reed," she began, "the children spoke of stirring dangers in the sea. Do you have any knowledge of such things?" He blew out a soft breath, letting his gaze wander to the tapestry. "Only rumors, passed along by the crannogmen who range near the coasts of the Bight. They say the tides have been restless, that schools of fish move in strange patterns. Some claim to have seen shapes beneath the waves, larger than whales, gliding beneath moonlight. It could be fear-mongering, but in these times, who can say? Nain. Sir Geralt Slate rubbed his chin. The royal fleets rarely patrol the northern coasts. They focus on King's Landing, Dragonstone, and the Stepstones. If a threat emerges up here, we might have no immediate protection aside from the local lords. Lord Reed shrugged gently. We've always survived by cunning rather than open force. But if something monstrous stirs, cunning alone may not suffice. Then, Arya turned to Maester Arwood. Have you heard of any relevant lore from the Citadel, about sea creatures awakened by magic? The Maester hesitated, adjusting his spectacles. There are fragmentary accounts from the Dawn Age, referencing creatures that lurked in the Sunset Sea or in the Shivering Sea. The histories are incomplete. The Citadel never gave them much credence, until the White Walkers proved that legends can be real. Some speak of giant krakens, leviathans with tentacles wide enough to drag whole ships under. Others mention sea dragons. One text claims that in ancient times, the children sang to the seas as well as the forests, raising creatures that aided them. But it's all half myth at best. Nendernon. Morin let out a low whistle. If any of that is real, I'd rather not meet it in a fishing boat. A subdued laugh rippled around the table, though no one seemed genuinely amused. The tension of possibility weighed on them. Arya set down her cup. We'll report this to King Ryan. The crown might bolster the northern coasts, or at least keep an eye out for any rumors from sailors. Meanwhile, we can only abide by the Children's Council. Be cautious, respect the new balance. Nat. Will you return to Winterfell now? Lord Reed asked. I intend to, yes, Arya replied. I'll ensure the North continues to abide by the pact. I also plan to send an envoy to White Harbor to gather more first-hand reports of these ships from Essos. If the sea's changes are widespread, it's not just a local phenomenon. They talked a while longer, discussing how best to spread the new guidelines for river navigation. Eventually, the hour grew late, and one by one, they drifted off to their chambers. Arya's room was a small but comfortable nook, lit by a single lantern. She sank onto the straw mattress, listening to the murmur of water against the fortress walls. Her mind buzzed with the day's events, overshadowed by the haunting thought that the realm's challenges might not be confined to the land. When at last she slipped into sleep, her dreams were filled with images of writhing seaweeds, colossal shapes drifting through black water, and the faint singing of the children echoing across the waves. They set out for Winterfell 2 days later, after finalizing the arrangements with the Riverlords and bidding farewells to Lord Reed. The journey back seemed faster, partly because they knew the route, and partly because the weather favored them. Still, Arya rode in a pensive silence. She would glance at the swirling waters of the neck, half expecting to see a pair of luminous eyes in the depths. Nothing emerged, but the feeling of being watched lingered. When at last they broke free of the bogs and reached the firmer ground of the north, Arya felt an inexplicable relief. The forests that surrounded them were deepening yearly, the pines and oaks thrumming with unseen power. But this was her home, where the weirwood stood watch, and the old magic was at least somewhat familiar. She led her companions to a small holdfast for the night, a sturdy stone tower belonging to House Flint, and there they found a decent meal and respite from the chill winds. Over supper, Ilya confided that she too felt unsettled about the sea. Maybe I'm just being a bare islander, she said with a faint smile, used to the sea's perils. But something about this talk of ancient creatures and green-lit waves sets my teeth on edge. Dantentain. Arya chewed a piece of bread thoughtfully. If the children can't control it fully, that means it's truly something old and wild. The realm might have to face a threat that doesn't reason like men or the children. I only pray it remains in the deep. They resumed their journey at first light, crossing the snowy plains that led up toward Winterfell. By midday, they spotted the castle's gray walls rising above the stark landscape. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and the distant bustle of activity brought a sense of homecoming. As they passed through the gates, stable hands rushed to take their horses. Stewards met them in the courtyard with warm cloaks and mulled wine. Arya surveyed the towers and ramparts, noting the creeping vines that had grown a little thicker since she'd last paid close attention. The interplay of stone and greenery was more pronounced now, giving Winterfell an almost sylvan aura. "Lady Arya," a steward said, bowing low. "Ravens arrived from King's Landing and White Harbor. They await you in the Solar." "Thank you," she said, nodding for her companions to disperse and rest. She tugged off her riding gloves and climbed the familiar steps to her study, where a small fire crackled in the hearth. She found 3 scrolls set neatly on her table. One bore the royal seal of King Ryan Targaryen, another the Merman sigil of House Manderley, and the third carried a strange, unfamiliar mark. An Eastern stamp, perhaps from some port in Essos. Curious, she started with the royal letter. Breaking the wax, she scanned King Ryan's tidy script. He expressed gratitude for her updates, acknowledged the new instructions about river trade, and agreed to dispatch several envoys to ensure compliance in the south. Then came the part that made her brow crease. "I have also received disturbing accounts from merchants arriving at King's Landing. They claim that certain ships from Volantis and Korth speak of a green tide in the summer sea, great mats of glowing seaweed drifting near the coastlines, and bizarre fish kills along the beaches. My small council is alarmed. The maesters cannot provide a clear explanation. They urge me to fortify the coasts, but to what end?" Arya set the letter aside, her heart pounding a little faster. So it wasn't just the shivering sea. The changes in the ocean might be global, stirring every corner of the known world. She reached for the scroll from White Harbor next, unsealing it carefully. Lord Wyman Manderley's message echoed King Ryan's concerns, detailing how foreign captains refused to sail too far east or north now, fearful of tangling with this strange seaweed that could foul their hull. Some believed it to be cursed, whispering that it moved with sentient purpose, latching onto ships at night. A few sailors had vanished, leaving behind half-submerged vessels choked by the slime. Manderley ended with a desperate entreaty for guidance. Finally, she examined the unknown scroll. The parchment was of a fine, exotic quality, the seal bearing a stylized seahorse entwined with a lotus. She carefully broke it open and realized it was a letter in heavily accented common tongue. "To the lords of Westeros, we send greetings from the port of New Geese. Our merchants speak of unnatural phenomena in the seas, patches of phosphorescent weed that entangle ships, and reports of monstrous silhouettes below the waves. Some who have ventured forth claim to hear whispering, as though from drowned spirits. We humbly request any knowledge or solution your learned maesters might have. These events threaten all who sail the summer sea, east and west alike." Arya closed her eyes, steadying herself. The sea was indeed changing, not just near the north or the west coast, but across the world. And if it had any connection to the children's reawakening of magic, they might have less control over it than they did on land. She needed counsel, and swiftly. That evening, she summoned Maester Arwood, Maester Brenmar, and Elia Mormont to her study, spreading out the 3 letters on the table. The flicker of candlelight played across their faces as they read, exchanging worried glances. Arwood pursed his lips. "This is beyond local. If magic is truly revitalizing the seas, we could face phenomena not seen since the Age of Heroes. If ever." Elia tapped the White Harbor missive. "Sailors vanishing, weed entangling ships. Could it be something akin to how the forests entangle travelers who trespass? But now in the ocean, like the children's magic is bleeding into the water?" "Possible," Brenmar said. "But the children said themselves they don't wholly command the ocean. The seas might be reviving powers older than the children, older than men." Arya folded her arms. "Then we must unify our response. The Crown, the Citadel, the lords who rely on maritime trade. We all need to coordinate. The realm can't afford chaos on the seas, especially with Essos also affected. This might escalate into a crisis that spans both continents." "Down." "But how?" Elia asked. "The seas are vast, and no single kingdom rules them. Even if we gather a fleet, what do we do? Attempt to burn the seaweed? We might only anger whatever forces dwell there. Arwood nodded gravely. Knowledge must be our first step. We could send ships to investigate. Small, nimble vessels with learned maesters aboard. Perhaps accompanied by a few of the children if they're willing. We need direct observation. Arya considered that. Convincing the children to board ships might be a challenge. They were creatures of the forest, rarely venturing even into open plains, let alone across the sea. We have free folk who fish beyond the frozen shore, she mused aloud. They might be braver about these waters than southern sailors, or the Ironborn, though they've been quiet since the realm stabilized. Perhaps King Ryan can commission a joint expedition? Elias' eyes lit with cautious hope. A union of houses, with some representation from the children, if possible. That might at least yield answers. But do you think the children would leave their forests? They never. Arya recalled the amethyst-eyed child's words. All is one. If they truly believed that, perhaps they would see the necessity in investigating the seas. I can try to reach out through the Weirwood network. The children might respond, if they sense the gravity of the situation. If the entire world is threatened, it's in their interest to help. Nenteram? They conferred late into the night, drafting letters that Arya would send via Raven to King Ryan, Lord Manderley, and any other significant maritime powers, House Velaryon, House Redwine, the Lords of the Shield Islands. They proposed a grand expedition to chart and study the phenomenon. Carefully, they emphasized that no one should embark on widespread destruction of the seaweed until they knew more. A measured approach, reminiscent of how they'd begun to handle the forests, seemed prudent. As they sealed the scrolls, Arya's mind drifted back to that hush of the godswood, the sense of being surrounded by living presences older than any man. The land had found a precarious peace with humanity, guided by the children, but the sea was an unpredictable new frontier. She couldn't shake the feeling that Westeros, indeed, the entire known world, stood on the brink of another monumental change. Would it be catastrophe, or would it lead to a deeper harmony? Within days, ravens flew out from Winterfell in all directions, bearing Arya's messages. She returned to her duties managing the north, all the while awaiting replies. Amid the day-to-day tasks, resolving disputes between local lords, supervising the new guidelines for forest stewardship, ensuring trade caravans to the Vale, her thoughts remained with the sea. The rest of Westeros might not feel the same urgency, but House Stark had become something of a guardian for the land's deeper mysteries. A fortnight later, she stood on the battlements, the chill wind lashing her cloak, watching the northern horizon. The sun was setting in a blaze of gold and pink. A swirl of crows rose from the distant treetops, cawing as they circled. She felt, rather than heard, footsteps behind her. It was Morin, ever silent in approach. "My lady," he said softly, coming to stand at her side. "We received a raven from King Ryan. He's agreed to the expedition. He'll dispatch ships from Dragonstone and King's Landing, and invites the North to contribute if we can." She turned, relief mingled with trepidation in her eyes. "Good. That's the first step. And the children?" He shook his head. "No word. We tried the Weirwoods. Either they haven't answered, or we don't know how to listen well enough." He squinted into the twilight. "But if they truly see everything through the roots and branches, they know about this. Maybe they'll appear when they choose." Arya nodded. "Perhaps we should send an envoy to the Neck again, or to one of their known groves. A direct appeal. If they want men to handle the sea carefully, they should help us understand what's out there." "Agreed," Morin said. "But who should go?" Arya frowned, the wind tugging at the strands of her hair. "Elia can lead a small party back to the Neck. She's been our liaison before, and Lord Reed can guide her. If the children want to speak, they'll do so there." "Nathalam." Morin nodded, gazing out over the white sky. "It's a dangerous path we walk, isn't it? We keep forging alliances with beings we barely understand, hoping they spare us from the consequences of a magic we set loose." A wry smile twisted Arya's lips. "We didn't exactly set it loose. We only survived the long night and accepted the children's help. But you're right. We walk blindly in a realm that grows stranger by the day. Yet what choice do we have? The alternative was a kingdom ravaged by war, famine, and the undead. Now, at least, the land thrives, even if we must tread carefully. Nansokan. They stood in companionable silence, watching the sun sink behind the line of trees. The cawing of the crows finally receded into the distance. Arya wondered if they were normal birds, or if, through their eyes, the children saw the keep. At times she thought she felt the weirwood's presence echoing through her mind, as though it recognized her as kin to the old ways. She had no Greenseer's gifts, but the old blood of the first men ran in her veins, tying her to something deep and ancient. At dawn, Elia Mormont prepared to depart once again for the Neck, leading a small party of sworn shields and a pair of maesters. Arya saw her off in the courtyard exchanging a firm clasp of hands. "Be cautious," Arya said. "We're not in crisis with the children, but the bogs hold many mysteries." Elia gave a sardonic grin. "They haven't devoured me yet." Then she sobered. "I'll do my best to urge them to meet with us about the sea. But if they keep silent, I can't force their hand." "Nein." Arya nodded. "I understand. Just do what you can." With that, Elia and her party mounted their horses, intending to switch to boats once they hit the swamp roads. Arya watched them vanish through the gates, feeling the pinch of worry. She trusted Elias' resolve, but the situation could become more complicated if the children refused to cooperate. Men did not often fare well on their own against ancient forces. Winterfell returned to its routine. Days passed. Arya managed the affairs of the North, kept track of the New Forest guidelines, and received periodic updates on the formation of King Ryan's seaborne expedition. House Valerian sent word that they would contribute swift ships skilled in open water navigation. House Redwine promised a few war galleys, and the Crown would dispatch the royal flagship, Sunfire's Pride, from King's Landing. Lord Manderley at White Harbor readied 2 stout carracks, and even the Ironborn re-emerged, with House Harlaw showing interest in the venture, perhaps eager for new opportunities, or perhaps simply curious. The expedition planned a rendezvous at Dragonstone in late spring, from which they would sail east to investigate the rumored glows in the summer sea, then north toward the Shivering Sea. There was talk of sending an exploratory mission around the southern coasts, but no one wanted to commit to circumnavigating Westeros with unknown horrors afloat. Still, the plan was bold, unprecedented since the time men first built ships for exploration. Tension rippled through the 7 kingdoms. Would this expedition provoke the ocean's wrath, or find solutions that benefited all? Then, nearly a month after Elias' departure, a raven arrived from the Neck bearing her seal. Arya received the scroll in the same solar where she had read those dire letters. Breaking the seal, she skimmed Elias' words. Relief coursed through her. Elia was safe. She reported that the children had indeed appeared, though their initial reaction to the expedition was ambivalent. They had told Elia, "We guard the land, not the waves. The seas have their own spirits, older and more restless. Yet if men unite in caution, we shall send watchers of our own to observe. We cannot promise to leash what dwells beneath, but we can share what knowledge remains in our ancient songs." Denor. Elia wrote that the children offered a rendezvous in a place rarely seen by human eyes. A coastal grove near the Cape of Eagles, just south of the Vale, where forested cliffs met the sea. There, perhaps, the children would demonstrate whatever they knew of oceanic magic, enough to guide the expedition. The message ended with Elia's plan to travel there with a handful of the children. She invited Arya to join if she wished, though the journey was perilous. Arya mulled over the letter. The Cape of Eagles was known for its high, craggy shores and swirling tides. Few dared approach by ship because of the treacherous rocks, and the surrounding forests were said to be thick with illusions and half-tamed beasts. But if the children were willing to share knowledge by the sea, this might be an invaluable chance. Arya felt a tug of responsibility. She had been part of forging the pact on land. Now, she had a duty to see that man's foray into the sea adhered to the same caution. If the children were offering to meet, she should go. Without hesitation, she began making preparations. She selected a small retinue, Morin, who was accustomed to rough travel, Sir Gerald Slate for protection, Maester Brenmar for record-keeping and possible magical insight, and a handful of loyal guards, skilled in stealthy movement. A large force would be impractical. She sent a raven to King Ryan, explaining her intent. She also wrote to the Vale, letting them know she might pass along the fringes of their domain. 2 weeks later, Arya found herself on a winding mountain trail, the sea roaring far below. She and her retinue had traveled east from the north, skirting the Vale's border, and now approached the rocky region of the Cape of Eagles. The path was treacherous, loose stones, steep inclines, and sudden drop-offs that plummeted into the frothing water. Sea spray mixed with the scent of pine in the crisp air, and gulls wheeled overhead, their calls echoing off the cliff faces. Somewhere up ahead, Elia Mormont and the children awaited. They made camp one evening on a narrow shelf of land beneath a stand of cypress trees battered by sea wind. Morin scouted ahead, returning to report that he had spotted signs of a small encampment not far from the shore, likely Elias' group. Arya let out a breath of relief. "We'll join them in the morning," she said, warming her hands at the fire. The sky overhead was a dark, velvety blue, flecked with stars. The waves crashed relentlessly below. Maester Brenmar settled beside her, carefully unrolling a sheaf of parchment. "Lady Arya, I've prepared a few questions for the children if they're willing to share their lore. I hope they might know of any living creatures that predate the first men, especially those that dwell in the sea. Our records from the Citadel are so fragmentary." She glanced at the parchment, seeing sketches and notations about mythical sea beasts, krakens, leviathans, aquatic dragons. "If they're amenable, ask. But we must tread lightly. The children can be cryptic. Sometimes they speak in riddles, or they simply show us illusions that we must interpret ourselves." He nodded, nervous excitement in his eyes. "I understand. I'll proceed with caution." "Do you?" Sir Geralt approached, his armor muted with a thick cloak to ward off the chill. He scanned the surroundings warily. "It's too quiet here," he murmured. No typical forest sounds, no crickets, nothing. Even the gulls fell silent. Arya listened closely. Indeed, only the wind and the waves could be heard. She felt a faint prickling at the back of her neck, the sense that the land itself was watching. "We're near a place the children consider sacred," she said softly. "They often cloak it in illusions, hush the wildlife. Sleep with one eye open tonight." Nightfall deepened, the wind picked up, and Arya turned in, lying beneath a canvas shelter with her cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. Exhaustion weighed on her, but her mind refused to calm. She stared at the dancing shadows cast by the fire, recalling how differently her life had turned out than she once imagined. Instead of simply governing Winterfell in the wake of the long night, she found herself acting as an envoy between men and ancient beings, forging uneasy pacts that shaped the fate of the world. Some part of her longed for simpler days, but the memories of that brutal war reminded her there was no return to the ignorance of the past. She dozed off to the lullaby of crashing waves, only to awaken abruptly in the middle of the night to a faint sound, like singing carried on the wind. She sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear. The melody was distant, ethereal, unlike any human voice. It reminded her of the chants she had once heard from the children deep in the weirwood groves, but this had a mournful resonance, as though it rose from a watery cavern. Carefully, she slipped from her bedding and stepped outside, where the dying campfire cast flickering shadows. Morin stood watch, eyes wide, scanning the darkened cliffside. "You hear it too?" he whispered, indicating the direction of the water. Arya nodded. "It's them." They didn't approach the sound, unsure if it was an invitation or a warning. Instead, they stood there, letting the haunting melody coil through the night air. Gradually it faded. Only once it was gone did Arya return to her shelter, uneasy. She wondered if the ocean itself was learning a new song, or if the children were calling to something beneath the waves. Dawn broke gray and cold, the sun a pale disk behind clouds. Arya roused the camp, eager to find Elia and the children. They packed quickly, picking their way along the narrow coastal trail, guided by Morin's recollection of the encampment he had seen. After about an hour of cautious travel, They rounded a bend and found themselves overlooking a small pebbly cove sheltered by towering cliffs. There, perched near a sea cave, were a handful of tents formed from sealskin and driftwood, plus a ring of stones for a fire. She recognized the banners of House Mormont fluttering lightly in the breeze. They descended carefully, picking their way down switchback paths carved into the cliff. At the bottom, Elia Mormont greeted them with palpable relief. She wore a heavy cloak lined with bear fur, and her face was wind-chapped, but her bearing was strong as ever. "You made it," she said, clasping Aria's arms. "I wasn't sure if you'd come." Aria offered a small smile. "I couldn't let you have all the fun." She scanned the camp, noting a few familiar faces among the Mormont guards. Then she spotted 3 small forms near the mouth of the cave, partially hidden behind a cluster of driftwood stumps. The children. One of them had hair tinged with silver, the color of sea foam, and wore a cloak that seemed woven of kelp. Another was bark-skinned, though flecked with patches of pale algae. The third child was the amethyst-eyed one, a figure Aria remembered from the Neck and other gatherings. All watched the newcomers intently, silent and inscrutable. Morin let out a soft exhalation. "They followed us here," he said. "Just like they said they would. Watchers of the sea." Elia nodded, lowering her voice. "They've been singing at night, though we can't tell if they're calling to something or just communing with the waves. They hinted that the sea cave leads to a place of old power, but they haven't allowed any of us to go inside yet." Aria peered at the cave, noting the slick rocks and the rhythmic wash of the tide. "Maybe now that we're here they'll show us." As if sensing her intent, the amethyst-eyed child stepped forward, picking a careful path across the pebbles. They halted a few steps away, inclining their head in a subtle greeting. "Wolf's daughter," they said in that soft, echoing voice. "You come seeking knowledge of the sea?" Aria inclined her head. "Yes. You said you might share what remains of your ancient songs. The realm prepares an expedition, but we fear the ocean's unknown power." The child gazed out at the rolling waves. "The sea was once our ally, and also our foe. It is older than the trees. In hidden caverns beneath the cliffs, there are runes from the Dawn Age, set in stone by those who served the great powers of the deep. We shall show you, if you have courage. But be warned, knowledge can be a burden." A chill pricked the back of Aria's neck. "We are prepared," she said, though she wasn't entirely certain that was true. Still, she had come all this way. Better to see for herself. The other 2 children glided forward, their luminous eyes reflecting the morning light. Without words they turned and headed toward the cave entrance. Aria gestured for Morin, Elia, and Maester Brenmar to follow, while Sir Gerald and the rest of the guard kept watch outside. The tide was at mid-ebb, leaving enough space to walk on damp sand and rock. The children led them inside, the echoes of the surf growing louder, resonating in the enclosed space. Seaweed clung to the walls, and rivulets of water trickled down from above, forming small pools on the floor. A dim, greenish light emanated from patches of phosphorescent algae, giving everything a ghostly glow. The children moved with sure-footed grace, skipping over slippery stones. Aria and her companions stepped carefully, mindful of the treacherous footing. Deeper they ventured, past half-submerged boulders and winding corridors of stone shaped by eons of waves. Eventually, the passage opened into a cavernous space, the vaulted ceiling shimmering with stalactites that dripped mineral-rich water. In the center was a natural basin of seawater, connected to the ocean by underwater tunnels. The children circled this basin and began to hum, soft, resonant notes that reverberated against the stone, weaving an otherworldly melody. As they sang, the surface of the water quivered and began to glow with a faint, bluish light. Maester Brenmar nearly dropped his parchment in astonishment. Elia's hand drifted to the hilt of her sword, a reflex of tension. Morin looked equally spellbound, eyes wide. Aria swallowed, feeling that familiar mixture of awe and apprehension she had come to associate with the children's magic. The amethyst-eyed child lifted both hands, gesturing for silence. Then they spoke, the echoes doubling their voice. "Listen to the old water. It carries memories from before men walked the land. See what it reveals. Then said, as if on command, shapes formed in the glowing water, ephemeral images, swirling like underwater phantoms. Arya leaned closer, heart pounding. She saw what looked like vast silhouettes sliding through watery darkness, creatures with serpentine tails or multiple limbs. Some resembled giant squids, others more draconic. A few were unrecognizable masses of tentacles and fins. Then came images of old stone circles on the seafloor, carved with runes that glowed faintly in the gloom. Hooded figures, neither children nor human, seemed to perform rituals around these circles, as if worshipping something. Ilya exhaled sharply. Gods, what are we seeing? The bark-skinned child's voice carried a hint of sorrow. In the Dawn Age, the seas had their guardians and their monsters. Some of our kin lived in the watery depths, shaped for that realm. Others were separate, worshippers of what men might call drowned gods, or deep powers. Conflicts raged beneath the waves, unknown to men. That is what your expedition may stir. Besides, Maester Brenmar scribbled furiously on a scrap of waxed parchment. Those shapes, are they real creatures that still exist, or only illusions? The child's gaze remained fixed on the swirling visions. Some may survive in the deepest trenches, sleeping or scattered. The renewal of magic can wake them, as it woke the land. You must tread carefully. The images faded, replaced by a calmer swirl of luminescence. Then came glimpses of a different era, perhaps more recent. The formation of thick mats of glowing seaweed, drifting in currents, tangling around ships. Arya recognized the descriptions from the letters. She saw illusions of men on deck, brandishing torches, only for the weed to slither up the hull, extinguishing flames and dragging them overboard. More illusions flickered, showing the weed drifting away afterward, leaving empty decks behind. A sense of dread welled in Arya's chest, imagining entire crews lost. Ilya's voice trembled slightly. So it's alive. In a manner, said the child with seafoam hair. Not as men or beasts are alive, but an extension of the ocean's awakened magic. It feeds on life energy. Fire can repel it, but not easily, and too much violence might draw worse things from below. The amethyst-eyed child turned to Arya. You see the dangers your expedition faces, but knowledge can guide you. There are ways to calm or redirect the weed with certain resonances, songs keyed to the water's flow. We can teach you part of this if you vow to use it with respect. Ma'am? Arya let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. We vow. Our expedition isn't meant to conquer the seas, only to understand them and prevent disaster. Morin, swallowing hard, added, We'll spread the word. If fire is not the answer, we need a gentler method. A faint nod from the child. We can show your maester the runes that shape the water's flow. Simple inscriptions or chanting can deter the weed from clinging to your ships, but it will not protect you from everything lurking in the depths. No, Sinheld. Brenmar's eyes shone with scholarly wonder. Thank you, he said softly. We'll do our best to record and share this knowledge. Elia caught Arya's gaze. This is bigger than we imagined, she murmured. We're dealing with the ocean's own pantheon of powers. Even the children seem wary. Arya nodded, throat tight. We can only do our part. Let's learn what we can. The children directed them to the walls of the cavern, where faint markings glowed in the same phosphorescent algae. Arya realized these were runes, not in the script of men, but in the swirling shapes reminiscent of the children's ancient language. The amethyst-eyed child demonstrated how a particular hum or note would cause the runes to brighten, then traced them slowly so Brenmar could replicate them. It felt surreal, like learning a spell from some long-lost, inhuman culture. And perhaps that was exactly what it was. Hours passed in that watery grotto, the tide lapping in the distance. Arya's legs grew numb from crouching and studying the runes. Yet she persisted, driven by the urgency of understanding. If these inscriptions could repel or redirect the lethal seaweed, it might save countless lives. All the while, those ghostly illusions flickered in her memory. Monstrous shapes slumbering in the depths. At last, the children ceased their singing, and the glow in the water receded to a faint shimmer. The amethyst-eyed child turned to them with a solemn expression. "Now you carry a fragment of the sea's song. Use it wisely. Tell your king that these powers are not meant for dominion. They are to pacify or redirect, nothing more. We will watch from afar. If men break faith, if they try to harness the deep for war or greed, the consequences will be beyond measure." Numb, Arya felt the weight of that warning like a physical burden. She bowed her head. "We understand. We'll do all we can to keep men from such folly." With that, the children turned as one and began walking deeper into the cavern, out of sight. Arya and her companions exchanged uneasy looks. Part of her wanted to follow, to ask more questions, but she knew the children revealed only what they chose to reveal. Clutching the notes and runes that Brenmar had scrawled, she exhaled a shaky breath. "We should go," she said. "We have what we came for." They retraced their steps through the slippery passages, the ocean's roar growing louder until they emerged into the cool coastal air. Outside, the sunlight felt startlingly bright. Elia shielded her eyes, expression pensive. "That was something," she murmured. "Magic as old as the sea itself." Arya nodded, scanning the horizon where the gray-blue ocean stretched endlessly. She tried to imagine what might lie beneath those waves, awakened by the same forces that had revived the forests. Could men ever truly coexist with powers that dwarfed them so completely? They spent the rest of the day in the cove, consulting among themselves, refining what they had learned. Brenmar practiced the runic tracings and humming notes, verifying that he could reproduce the faint glow on a patch of phosphorescent algae near the water. It gave them confidence that the knowledge was real. If the expedition's ships could etch or hang these runic words, if the sailors could chant the right tones, perhaps the dreaded seaweed would leave them be. In the late afternoon, Morin, who had ventured further along the beach, returned with news of a small landing where a boat might be put to sea. "We can sail north or south if we want to test these wards," he suggested. "Though I'd rather not go too far. The rocks here are treacherous." Arya shook her head. "Not yet. We'll carry this knowledge back to King Ryan. The expedition is meant to unify our efforts. I won't risk a handful of us alone at sea, without full support." And so they prepared to leave the next morning, intending to journey back overland, then across friendly territories, until they reached White Harbor or another port that could take them south. That evening, as they sat around a driftwood fire, finishing a meal of fish and dried biscuits, they heard the children singing again. This time, faint and mournful, their voices echoing along the cliffs. It felt like a benediction and a farewell. Arya found herself swallowing hard, moved by the eerie beauty of it. She realized she might never again witness this exact juncture of land and sea magic, entwined in a single place. Their departure at dawn was swift and purposeful. Though traveling that narrow trail was still perilous, they felt invigorated by a sense of accomplishment. They had gleaned valuable knowledge that could stave off maritime disaster. Now, they had to spread the word before ignorance or fear led some lord or captain to lash out blindly and unleash havoc. The days on the road blurred, each step carrying them closer to the heart of Westeros. From the jagged coastline of the Cape of Eagles, they veered inland through the Vale's outskirts, avoiding major population centers, but occasionally stopping at small holdfasts for supplies. News traveled slowly in these parts, and the local folk had no clue about the looming challenges at sea. They were more concerned with the thickening forests and rumors of shape-shifting beasts that occasionally prowled the edges of farmland. Arya offered what reassurances she could, mindful of the pact with the children. At night, in quiet corners of inns or in her tent, she studied the runes with Brenmar, determined to master even a fraction of their meaning. Eventually, they reached the wide roads leading toward the riverlands, crossing paths with merchant caravans and a few parties of knights. Word of the impending expedition had spread. Arya overheard travelers discussing a fleet gathering near Dragonstone, though details were scarce. Some folks were excited, others dismissive, still others anxious. The sea was a distant concern for many farmers who had never left their villages. At a crossroads inn, they encountered a small retinue bearing the sigil of House Velaryon, a silver seahorse on a pale green field. Their leader, a young knight named Sir Andros Velaryon, recognized Arya's direwolf badge and approached respectfully. "Lady Stark, an honor," he said with a bow. "I bring word from Driftmark. Our Lord Velaryon has already sailed for Dragonstone to join the royal flagship in preparing for the great voyage. They expect delegations from the Reach, the Westerlands, and even some from Essos." Arya's eyes brightened. "That's good news. My party and I will head there as soon as we can. I have crucial information to share about how to handle the strange weed." "No." Ser Andros nodded. "I pray it's in time. Some ships have already set sail to do reconnaissance and have not returned. My uncle was among them." Arya pressed her lips together. "I'm sorry to hear that. But we may have a way to ward off the weed. We must ensure everyone knows before more vessels vanish." They parted ways the next morning, and Arya urged her group onward at a brisk pace, though she also had to consider the safety of traveling with limited escorts. The roads of the Riverlands were relatively calm, but brigands still lurked. Yet by some fortune, or perhaps the subtle watch of the children, they encountered no major trouble. Along the way, she noticed that farmland seemed healthy. Crops grew tall, livestock appeared strong. The new balance with the forest was holding here, even if tensions over trade routes had yet to fully abate. After weeks on the road, they finally arrived at a port on the Blackwater Rush, not far from King's Landing. Arya could have gone straight to the capital by land, but time was pressing, and the best route to Dragonstone was by ship. She arranged passage aboard a sturdy river galley heading for the sea. The captain, a weathered woman named Lana Whitewater, promised to get them to the Blackwater Bay swiftly. "We'll see you to Dragonstone," she said, "though I'd prefer to sail in daylight as much as possible. I've heard rumors of that cursed weed drifting near Shipbreaker Bay." Arya nodded. "We carry runic wards that might protect us if we encounter it. Let us hope we won't need them." Deep down, she was anxious to test if these wards truly worked. The children had shown them illusions, but illusions weren't always the same as real encounters. Still, it was their best hope. They set off at sunrise, the galley gliding down the broad Blackwater Rush. Arya stood on the deck, wind ruffling her hair, scanning the riverbanks for any unusual signs, but all seemed calm. The voyage downstream took a couple of days, with stops at small docks to replenish water. By the third morning, they reached the mouth of the river where it met Blackwater Bay. King's Landing rose in the distance to the north, its charred and partially rebuilt spires still bearing scars from the wars. Arya decided against docking in the capital. Time was of the essence, and King Ryan was already at Dragonstone. Instead, they steered southeast, out into the open bay. The sea stretched before them, a rolling expanse of blue-green. Gulls circled overhead, and the salt air filled Arya's lungs. Despite her anxiety, she found a certain exhilaration in the wide horizon. She wondered how many times her forebears had made this crossing, though rarely under such precarious circumstances. The sun shone bright, the wind moderate, perfect sailing weather, at least for now. As they neared the channel leading to Dragonstone, the watchman cried out, pointing to a shape in the distance. Arya shielded her eyes, scanning the waves. At first, she saw only a dark smudge. Then, as they drew closer, she discerned it was a small, dismasted ship drifting aimlessly, battered by storms or something worse. A hush fell over the crew. Captain Lana ordered a cautious approach, though the crew looked uneasy. Arya felt her stomach tighten. The closer they got, the clearer the extent of the damage. The ship's hull was partially splintered, the deck strewn with debris, no sign of life. And clinging to the sides of the vessel, trailing in the water, was a stringy mass of green-brown weed that glowed faintly even in daylight. The cursed seaweed. Arya took a shaky breath. "Captain, hold us at a safe distance. We have wards to try, but let's not risk the ship until we see if they work." Lana nodded, ordering the rowers to slow. They watched as the weed seemed to pulse, as if alive, slithering across the broken vessel's timbers. Morin, at Arya's side, cursed under his breath. "That's just like in the illusions we saw." Maester Brenmar fumbled for his notes, scanning the runic script. We must trace them on a wooden surface and hum the resonance, he whispered, voice tight. Let's do it near the bow. Arya, Morin, and Brenmar carefully moved to the prow, while the rest of the crew stared in dread and fascination. Brenmar placed a piece of charcoal to the deck's railing, drawing the swirling lines he'd practiced. Arya joined him in humming the low, undulating tone the children had demonstrated, each note shifting to match the runes. Her cheeks flushed with the strangeness of it, but she persisted. At first, nothing happened. Then a soft glow emanated from the lines, faint as if glimpsed through frosted glass. The weed on the distant ship seemed to stir, its tendrils twitching. Slowly, almost reluctantly, it began to loosen its grip, sliding off the wreckage into the water. The entire mass drifted away, though it stayed near the surface. Arya felt a thrill of hope. The runes were working, or so it seemed. Captain Lana gaped, crossing herself. Mother, save us. What is that magic? Brenmar's voice trembled. It's from the children. We just followed their instructions. The weed continued to drift, as if repelled by the runic aura, eventually moving off to starboard by a good distance. Once it was far enough, the glow on the rail faded. The half-sunken wreck was left behind, free of the clinging strands. Yet, there was no sign of survivors. Arya swallowed, imagining the fate of the crew. We can't risk boarding, she said softly. It's too damaged, and there could be more weed inside. Let's mark the position, inform the Crown's men to see if anything can be salvaged later. Lana agreed. They resumed course, giving the drifting weed a wide berth. Arya's heart still hammered in her chest. The wards worked, at least in this instance. Perhaps that meant the expedition stood a chance. As they sailed on, she pondered how many other ships had not possessed such a means of defense. By midday, Dragonstone's forbidding towers and volcanic ridges came into view. Smoke curled from the fortress's chimneys. The sea around the island churned, swirling with strong currents. Arya spotted the gleaming hulls of multiple ships anchored off the coast, bearing sigils from across Westeros and beyond. Some displayed a golden rose, House Tyrell, others a golden lion, House Lannister, and one bore the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen. Smaller vessels flew the flags of Bravos, Pentos, and other free cities. The expedition was indeed gathering. They navigated into the harbor, passing by lines of warships and trade galleys. Soldiers and sailors peered curiously at the newcomer. Arya glimpsed a large regal vessel she assumed must be Sunfire's pride, the royal flagship. Standing on its deck, she thought she saw a figure with silver blonde hair and a splendid black cloak. King Ryan himself, perhaps. Captain Lana skillfully guided them to a free berth at the dock. A flurry of activity followed, lines thrown, gangplanks lowered, men in Targaryen livery stepping forward to inquire about arrivals. Arya disembarked with her companions, the salt air stinging her cheeks. The harbor master, a tall man with a ledger, nodded quickly at the sight of her direwolf sigil. Lady Stark, he said respectfully. His Grace is expecting you. A representative from the small council will escort you to the castle at once. She thanked him and turned to oversee her group. Maester Brenmar guarded the precious notes. Morin kept a watchful eye on the crowd. They formed up behind her, each outwardly calm but inwardly brimming with anticipation. The time had come to share what they'd learned from the children, and to see if all the lords and captains of this grand expedition would heed their counsel. They followed the harbor master up the steep, winding path to Dragonstone's imposing gates. The volcanic rock loomed black and jagged, carved into the shapes of dragons and gargoyles by ancient Valyrian craftsmen. Smoke from the fortress's internal hot springs vented into the sky. Inside, the courtyard bustled with activity. Supplies stacked for the voyage, knights in shining plate, exotic envoys from Essos in colorful robes. Arya paused, taking in the swirl of languages and fashions. Tension underlay the scene, a sense of uncertainty over what lay ahead at sea. A courtier in Targaryen black approached. A young woman with braided silver hair, introducing herself as Lady Alara Velaryon, distantly related to the king. She bowed politely. His Grace will see you in the Great Hall. This way, please. Arya exchanged glances with Morin and Alia. They squared their shoulders, trailing after Lady Alara. The corridors of Dragonstone were cavernous and echoing, lit by torches set in the mouths of carved dragon heads. They reached the great hall, where King Ryan Targaryen stood in conference with several lords and maesters. The moment he spotted Arya, he dismissed the others with a courteous nod. "Lady Arya," King Ryan said, extending a hand in greeting. He was of middling height, lean, with close-cropped silver hair and the intense violet eyes of his bloodline. Worry lines cut across his forehead, belying his youth. "I've been waiting anxiously for your arrival. We've lost ships already, and more threaten to sail soon." Arya inclined her head in a respectful bow. "Your Grace, I bring crucial information from the children of the forest, new knowledge that may help us survive the sea. But we must ensure every vessel is prepared." "Another one?" She proceeded to explain everything. The runic wards, the humming resonance, how they had tested it on the wreck found near the bay. Brenmar produced his notes, unrolling them on a nearby table. King Ryan, joined by a handful of advisors, leaned in to study the swirling shapes. One of the crown maesters, a gray-haired woman named Mester Galise, peered closely, adjusting her spectacles. "Fascinating," she breathed. "We have suspected for years that the children's language contained elements of symbolic magic, but never had anything this concrete. If it repels the weed, we must copy it immediately." "No." Ryan's expression remained grave. "We shall. But let me be clear with the lords. This is a protective measure, not a weapon. We must not provoke the sea further, or attempt to harness it for conquest." Arya felt relief at his firm stance. Yes, the children warned that if men try to exploit or wage war upon the awakened seas, we risk summoning far worse threats. "I have illusions that show monstrous creatures. The sea is not ours to tame." King Ryan nodded. "I'll make that plain at the next council. Many of these lords are eager to prove themselves at sea, especially after the humiliations of the long night. They don't understand that this threat is entirely different." "Well, no." He motioned for an attendant to fetch parchment and scribes. "Maester Brenmar, please demonstrate the runes to my scribes. We'll distribute them to the entire fleet. If we can ensure each ship is warded, perhaps we can stem the losses." Brenmar bowed, heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and responsibility. "At once, Your Grace." Ryan turned back to Arya, lowering his voice. "There's also the matter of the monstrous shapes some sailors claim to have seen, shadows beneath the waves, bigger than whales. I have no illusions about challenging them. But if they strike, what do we do?" Arya recalled the illusions the children had shown, those massive, alien forms. She exhaled shakily. "The children didn't give us a direct defense against such behemoths. Only caution. They say the ocean is older than the forests, less susceptible to their guidance. We might have to rely on avoiding or appeasing these creatures. If it comes to open battle, we could lose many ships." "Nectum now." The king gave a grim nod. "So be it. We can't shrink from the expedition, though. The sea lanes are vital to trade, and these phenomena threaten the entire realm. If we show cowardice, the realm may panic, or foreign powers might exploit our weakness." Arya understood. Even if the threat was great, doing nothing was not an option. Men must face the unknown in order to survive. "Then let us move swiftly," she said. "The runic wards are our best tool. And if we do encounter something monstrous, we must retreat rather than engage in a hopeless fight." "Then." Ryan pressed his lips together, then placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Your counsel has guided us well on land. I pray it guides us again at sea." He beckoned over one of his knights. "Fetch the lords for a council in the chamber of the painted table. Lady Stark will present the wards, and we'll finalize our plan." Within the hour, Arya found herself in that famous chamber, the painted table depicting the landmass of Westeros in grand detail. Around it stood a circle of powerful figures, lords, ladies, and representatives from the free cities. She recognized Lord Lannister, Lady Tyrell, a Braavosi Sea Lord's agent with a thin mustache, and others wearing fine silks or polished armor. The atmosphere was tense, bristling with ambition and unease. At the head of the table stood King Ryan, his posture rigid with determination. Arya stepped forward, each gaze turning on her. She was aware of the animosity some might harbor. She was, after all, the one who had brokered a pact that curtailed men's expansion on land. But the majority also respected her, for that same pact had brought prosperity after the horrors of the long night. King Ryan introduced her. "Lords and ladies, travelers from Essos, we have at last a potent solution to the weed that's destroying our ships. Lady Arya Stark and Maester Brenmar have brought knowledge from the children of the forest. Words that repel or redirect the cursed growth, Maester Brenmar." Brenmar cleared his throat, stepping in front of the painted table. His hands shook slightly, but his voice was steady. "These runes are drawn from the children's ancient script," he explained, unrolling a parchment to reveal the swirling lines. "When placed upon a ship's hull and accompanied by a low harmonic chant, these notes here, the weed appears to sense a boundary and withdraw. We tested it near the wreck of an entangled vessel. The weed retreated into open water." A hum of incredulous voices circled the room. Lord Lannister, arms folded, said, "Magic wards on ships? And what if it fails? Men die anyway." Brenmar swallowed. "There's risk, of course. But so far, it's our only proven method. Fire can work in a pinch, but is dangerous at sea, and may anger deeper forces." Lady Tyrell frowned, her green eyes troubled. "And these runes must be physically inscribed on every ship?" "Yes, my lady," Brenmar said. "We can paint them or carve them. Then the crew must learn the chant. We have scribes ready to distribute instructions. With enough discipline, each ship can be prepared in a few days." King Ryan stepped in. "We will enforce it as mandatory. Any captain refusing will not be sanctioned to sail in our expedition." A Braavosi merchant in a sky-blue doublet raised a hand. "And what of these rumored monsters under the waves? Wards or no wards, can we repel them?" Arya forced herself to meet his gaze. "We do not have direct wards for that. The children warn that stirring the seas too aggressively might awaken such beasts. Our only safeguard is to avoid provocation. If one emerges, we must show caution, and if possible, retreat." A wave of discontent passed around the table. Many were used to the idea of subduing threats with force. Lord Lannister sneered slightly. "Retreat? Are we so helpless?" King Ryan cast him a sharp glance. "This is not a question of pride. 1,000 years ago, men had dragons to tame the skies. Today we do not. The sea is a domain that yields to no king if it so chooses." A hush settled. Arya recognized the flicker of resentment on some faces, the acceptance on others. Then Lady Tyrell sighed. "Better to keep our people alive and commerce flowing than lose them to folly. I support the wards." A handful of others voiced cautious approval. Only a few, like Lord Lannister, remained stony-faced, but they recognized the crown's stance. The Braavosi merchant whispered with his colleagues, then nodded. "We will comply. Braavos cannot afford to lose more ships." King Ryan's posture relaxed a fraction, relief coloring his stern expression. Then it settled. "Our scribes will copy the wards. We'll instruct each fleet on how to carve or paint them and teach the chant. Only then shall the expedition sail." They spent hours hashing out logistics, where to station each fleet, which routes to explore first, how to coordinate signals if any monstrous threat was encountered. Arya offered counsel, drawing on the children's warnings. She insisted on smaller contingents exploring carefully, rather than massive armadas barging into unknown waters. Gradually, a plan took shape. The expedition would dispatch multiple squads of ships along key sea lanes, one toward the Summer Sea, another toward the Shivering Sea, another around the Iron Islands, all with the wards. They would gather information, rescue any stranded vessels if possible, and test whether the weed could be deterred en masse. Meanwhile, a central fleet under King Ryan's direct command would remain near strategic ports, ready to respond if any crisis erupted. As the meeting wound down, the lords departed in small clusters, forging alliances or exchanging skeptical remarks about woodland sorcery. Arya remained behind with the king, who sank into a chair by the painted table and rubbed his temples. "The real test is whether they follow through," he muttered. Some of these lords hate the idea of relying on magic. Others might consider using these runes as a weapon if they think they can manipulate it. Arya gave a somber nod. I know. The best we can do is warn them. If they break faith and attempt to harness the sea's powers, the consequences will be dire. The children will not intervene to save us from ourselves. Never when. Ryan nodded, looking every bit the weary monarch. I'll do my best to keep them in line. You've done great service, Lady Arya. I'd like you to stay here and advise me as we coordinate the expedition. She hesitated, thinking of Winterfell, but recognized the importance of her presence. I'll remain as long as needed, Your Grace. This is bigger than any one region now. Thank you, he said quietly. Then he rose, offering a polite bow. Go rest. You've earned it. We sail soon. Arya left the chamber, her mind swimming with the scale of the endeavor. She found her quarters in a tower overlooking the churning sea, where she collapsed onto a bed. Yet sleep eluded her for a long time. She kept picturing the illusions from the water cave, the monstrous shapes drifting through black depths, and the weeds slithering across battered decks. Men would soon be out there, relying on runes learned from an ancient, secretive race. The fate of the realm, and perhaps beyond, depended on a fragile alliance of land, sea, and humankind's humility. In the following days, Dragonstone became a hive of feverish activity. Scribes worked day and night to replicate the runic words onto parchment. Maesters gave lectures to crews on the proper tones of the chant, with more or less success. Some sailors were receptive, others bemused. Carpenters and painters set up stations along the docks, inscribing the swirling lines on hulls or sails. Arya, along with Brenmar, roamed from ship to ship, verifying the accuracy of the wards. Whenever a captain grumbled about silly forest scribbles, Arya would recount the near-abandoned wreck and how the weed withdrew when the wards were activated. That sobered most skeptics quickly. King Ryan's vow to make the wards mandatory proved easier said than done, for some lords believed the runes might taint their ships or offend the faith of the Seven. But the king stood firm, threatening to deny them participation if they refused. In the end, almost everyone complied. None wished to forfeit the prestige or potential profit of the expedition, nor defy the crown openly in these changed times. Late in the afternoon of the fourth day, Arya stood at the docks, watching as a large Westerlands carrack, the Goldmane, had its prow painted with the runes. The captain, a bluff man named Ser Garon Banafort, kept crossing his arms and shaking his head. Not sure how I'll explain this to the men back home, he muttered. They'll say we turned to druidic nonsense. Arya rested a hand on the prow, feeling the etched runes beneath her palm. Let them talk. At least you'll have a ship and a crew alive to return home and face their words. Ser Garon grunted, subdued. Well, best get on with it. She moved on, stepping over coiled ropes and half-empty barrels, heading to a cluster of sailors practicing the humming chant under a maester's direction. It sounded jarring at first, a collection of low drones and pitched murmurs. But the group was earnest, repeating the notes until they harmonized. Arya allowed herself a small smile. This was men adapting, an odd mixture of skepticism and necessity. She hoped it would be enough. That evening, King Ryan announced the expedition would launch the following morning. The flagship Sunfire's Pride would lead the central fleet, while the smaller groups set off in various directions, spaced over a few days to avoid crowding. Night fell, and the harbor was filled with lantern lights reflecting in the dark water. Arya found a moment of quiet, pacing along the fortress ramparts. The wind whipped her cloak, carrying the brine of the sea. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see King Ryan approach, wearing a heavy black cloak embroidered with the three-headed dragon in silver thread. Couldn't sleep either? He asked wryly. Arya shook her head. Too much on my mind. Once they sail, events will move beyond our direct control. He nodded, coming to stand at the parapet beside her, gazing out at the flickering lights of the anchored ships. I keep thinking about the stories of my ancestors, how they conquered Westeros with dragons. They had unstoppable might. Now here we stand, forced to rely on foreign runes and chants to survive the sea. His tone carried no bitterness, only resignation. Perhaps that's not a bad thing. If the Targaryens had learned more humility, we might have avoided many tragedies. Arya considered that. Power alone isn't a solution. The children taught us that. The land nearly died when men waged endless wars. Now the sea could suffer the same fate if we repeat those mistakes. Maybe this is how it always should have been. Men forced to respect forces greater than themselves. He inclined his head, eyes distant. I sometimes wonder if the world is outgrowing the age of kings. Perhaps the land and sea themselves are the true rulers now, and we just steward our little corners. She offered a faint smile, though it held sadness. In the north, we've learned to live with that idea. Winter is always waiting. Now the sea is waiting too. They stood in silence, each caught in private reverie. Far off, horns sounded across the bay as ships adjusted positions. Tomorrow, the ocean's vast unknown would confront them all. Arya stared at the shimmering water, recalling the swirling illusions in the cave, the sense of something ancient and boundless beneath the surface. She prayed the wards would hold, that men's greed wouldn't push them beyond the children's counsel. At dawn, the harbor came alive with drum beats and shouts. Sails unfurled, rigging creaked. The smell of pitch and salt mingled in the air. Crews hurried aboard, final crates of provisions loaded. King Ryan, clad in regal black and crimson, boarded Sunfire's Pride to cheers. Arya stood at the dock, watching as rowers began to pull oars in unison, the large war galley easing away from the quay. Her heart clenched. This was it. The expedition had begun. One by one, ships of various designs and flags followed, their runic wards freshly painted or carved. Some let out blasts of horns, others soared quietly into the morning mists. Arya felt a swelling of pride and dread at once. She had done all she could, armed them with knowledge from the children, reminded them of caution. The next steps lay in the hands of the sea itself. She had decided to remain behind temporarily, waiting for final envoys from the north and White Harbor. She would coordinate news and dispatch it swiftly if any of the expedition fleets ran into trouble. Her place was, for now, on land, bridging communication between realms. If the wards proved successful, she might later join a secondary wave of ships. By midday, the harbor was half empty, the majority of the expedition gone. Only stragglers or support vessels remained. Dragonstone felt eerily calm. Arya found her way to a vantage point on the castle walls, scanning the horizon. A few dark specks dotted the ocean, sails disappearing into the distance. She prayed they would not return as ghost ships like the one she'd seen. Turning from the parapet, she made her way down the steps, heading for the painted table chamber, where messages from the expedition would be received by trained ravens. She needed to remain vigilant. Her footsteps echoed on the stone floors, each step carrying the weight of an uncertain future. Yet she also felt a measure of resolve. Men and children had forged a bond that had tamed the land's fury. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could do the same with the sea, if they remembered humility and the lessons gleaned from older, wilder powers. That evening, as darkness shrouded Dragonstone, Arya stood by a narrow window, listening to the rhythmic pounding of waves against the volcanic cliffs. She recalled the child's final words in the cavern. We cannot promise to leash what dwells beneath. Use our knowledge to placate, not to enslave. She closed her eyes, imagining the swirl of runic wards glowing on a ship's hull, the low drone of chanting sailors. Beyond them, the watery expanse, deep and mysterious, possibly harboring half-forgotten gods. It was both terrifying and strangely beautiful, this tapestry of life, magic, and mortal will. In that hush, she allowed herself to hope that the expedition would be the dawn of a new era, one in which men learned to sail not as conquerors, but as guests in a realm older than their oldest memories. The children of the forest had returned to rule the land by ensuring men could not ravage it. Now the seas, awakened to magic, might demand similar respect. If men heeded the call, perhaps the world could endure. If not, well, the waves would take what they were owed. She whispered a silent prayer to the old gods, to the nameless powers in the depths, to the memory of those who had fallen in the long night. Let the realm learn from its past. Let men and ancient forces find accord once more. Let the darkness of the sea remain only a reminder of the wonder and peril that shaped the earth. With that final thought, she retired for the night, uncertain what tomorrow's tide would bring, but prepared to face it nonetheless.